Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Adrian Cole, tonight. The truth refuses to stay buried. If you enjoy the journey into mystery, don't forget to like and subscribe to Noir Intellect and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Now, the mystery begins.
Chapter 1. The Woman with Tutus. The trouble with quiet evenings at Nero Wolfe's brownstone was that they encouraged optimism. At 8:30 on a Thursday night in late November, I had reached the dangerous conclusion that the world had finally decided to leave us alone. Fritz Brenner had sent up a dinner that included roast squab, spinach with cream, potatoes browned in goose fat, and a salad whose dressing had been so delicately balanced that I briefly considered forgiving him for having refused to reveal the recipe. Wolfe had eaten with the concentration of a man engaged in serious negotiations. The orchids upstairs were resting beneath their lamps. The city outside had settled into its usual mixture of traffic, wind, and human dissatisfaction. I had a book open on my lap. Wolfe had a book open on his desk. Neither of us was reading. That was how peaceful the evening was. Then the doorbell rang. I looked at the clock, 8:37. "That's unfortunate," I said. Wolfe did not look up. "Perhaps it is a delivery. At this hour, Fritz has not yet begun serving dessert. That isn't a reason for optimism." The bell rang again. This time there was a pause between the first and second ring, as though whoever stood outside had reconsidered the wisdom of disturbing us, and then decided against reconsideration. I got up. "If it's a client, I'll tell her you're asleep. If it is a client, do not tell her anything." I stopped at the office door. "How am I supposed to know whether she's a client?" "You will know." "How?" "Women who arrive at this house at 8:37 in the evening carrying trouble generally announce it." I went downstairs. The woman standing on the stoop was perhaps 35, perhaps 40. She had the sort of face that did not reveal age, because it had learned to reveal nothing. Her dark coat was expensive without being conspicuous. Her gloves were grey. Hat was plain. Her eyes were pale and watchful. She held no handbag. That interested me. Most women arriving at a detective's office with a private problem carry enough luggage to establish a new residence. This one had only a small leather notebook tucked under her left arm. "Mr. Goodwin?" "That's what it says on the door." She glanced beyond me into the hallway. "Is Nero Wolfe here?" "Usually. I need to speak with him." "That can be arranged if you first tell me whether you're selling something." "No." "Collecting something?" "No." "Being blackmailed?" Her expression changed. Only slightly, but it changed. "May I come in?" "Certainly." She entered. I closed the door and took her coat. She hesitated before surrendering it. That was my second reason for interest. A person who fears surveillance often dislikes being separated from a coat containing pockets. I hung it on the hall rack. "Name?" She looked at me. "Eleanor Vane." "Occupation?" "Private." "That's not an occupation." "It is tonight." I smiled. "You'll get along with Wolfe." She did not smile. I led her upstairs. Wolfe was in his chair behind the desk, broad, immovable, and perfectly composed. He had changed into a dark maroon dressing gown and was holding a small book about 17th century botanical gardens. He looked at her once, then at me. "Sit." She sat. I took my usual chair. Wolfe closed the botanical book. "You have a problem." "Yes." "You require discretion." "Yes." "You have been threatened." Her fingers tightened around the leather notebook. "Yes." "By whom?" "I don't know." "That is inconvenient." She took a breath. "Someone is using my former identity." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Former identity?" "Yes." "Meaning your print name is Eleanor Vane?" "Yes." "And another name was once yours?" "Yes." "Which?" She looked toward me. I have often noticed that clients who are willing to tell Wolfe everything become reluctant when they discover I am part of the furniture. Wolfe noticed it too. "Mr. Goodwin is my representative," he said. "Your assistant, my representative." She nodded. "My former name was Lydia Mercer." I wrote it down. "Lydia Mercer," I repeated. She flinched. Not at the name itself. At hearing it aloud. "How long have you been Eleanor Vane?" "6 years." "Why did you change your name?" "I cannot tell you." Wolfe's eyebrows rose. "Then you cannot expect me to protect you from consequences attached to the name." "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes." You have been threatened because someone knows you were once Lydia Mercer. Not exactly. What exactly? She looked down at her hands. Someone has been contacting people who knew Lydia Mercer. With what purpose? To make them believe she has returned. Has she? No. Then what is the danger? The people who knew her are afraid of her. I waited. Wolfe did not. He was capable of waiting with the patience of a statue. Finally she said, 3 people have received letters. Names? She hesitated. Dr. Martin Bell. I wrote it down. Charles Avery. Another note. Agnes Reed. I looked up. And what did the letters say? They said only one thing. What? Tell Lydia Mercer the past is waiting. Wolfe leaned back. Interesting. I received the first letter myself. Addressed to Eleanor Vane? Yes. Then the writer knows both names. Yes. Where was it delivered? My house. How? Ordinary mail. Typed address. Return address? Nah. Postmark? New York. Threat? No. Then why are you frightened? She looked directly at him. Because yesterday someone left a photograph on my doorstep. Of you? No. Of Lydia Mercer? No. She opened the leather notebook. She removed a photograph. Of this. She placed it on Wolfe's desk. I leaned forward. It showed an old building. 3 stories of brick and stone. A narrow entrance. Tall windows. A faded sign above the door. The photograph had been taken at night. The building looked abandoned. What is it? I asked. The Bellwether Rooms. Hotel? Once. When? 20 years ago. Why does it matter? I don't know. Wolfe picked up the photograph. Where is it? Albany. Why send you a photograph of it? I don't know. Why does it frighten you? It doesn't. Then why are you here? She looked at him. Because the person who sent it knew something that nobody should know. What? She opened her mouth. Stopped. Then the front doorbell rang. She turned toward the sound. The expression on her face changed so completely that for 1 second I thought she had seen a corpse. Wolfe noticed. So did I. I went downstairs. Nobody stood outside. The stoop was empty. I opened the door. A small envelope lay on the step. No stamp, no address. I picked it up. There was writing on the front. 2 words. Eleanor Vane. I carried it upstairs. She stared at it. That wasn't there when I came in. I know. Wolfe held out his hand. I gave it to him. He opened it. 2 inches was a single sheet of paper. 1 sentence. You should have remained Lydia Mercer. Eleanor Vane stood abruptly. How did they know I was here? Wolfe did not answer. She turned toward the door. Mrs. Vane, I said. She ignored me. Sit down, Wolfe said. She stopped. I can't. You can. No. Then you may leave. She stared at him. It was the wrong thing to say to a frightened person, which was precisely why Wolfe said it. She gathered her coat. Where are you going? Home. That is unwise. I have to. You came here because you were afraid. I am more afraid now. Why? She looked at Wolfe. Because whoever is doing this knows where I am. She turned toward me. Please. Yes? If anyone asks, I was never here. That may be difficult. She opened the front door. I followed her onto the stoop. She moved quickly down the sidewalk. I watched until she reached the corner. Then she disappeared. I returned upstairs. Wolfe was still looking at the photograph. You let her go, I said. Yes. You didn't accept the case. No. You didn't refuse it either. No. Why? Because she was lying. About what? I do not know. Then how do you know? He turned the photograph over. Nothing. She said the Bellwether Rooms meant nothing to her. Yes. She looked at the photograph before she looked at the letter. So, she was not frightened by the photograph. You said she was, said she reacted. That's not the same thing. I sat down. Then what frightened her? The possibility that I might understand why the photograph was sent. I considered that. You're saying she wanted help without telling us what she needed help with? Yes. That is not uncommon. It is when the client disappears before accepting the engagement. I looked toward the door. She may come back. No. Why not? Because she left the notebook. I glanced at the small leather notebook. It was still on Wolfe's desk. She had forgotten it, or perhaps she had not. I picked it up. It was old. The leather had softened with handling. No initials, no name, no lock. Inside were handwritten entries, names, dates, addresses, short notes. Nothing immediately intelligible. The first page contained 6 names. Martin Bell, Charles Avery, Agnes Reed, Thomas Vale, Rebecca Stone, Lydia Mercer. I looked up. Her old names. Almost certainly dates, then a date 20 years later. The same date appeared beside 3 different names. That's odd. Continue. The notebook contained newspaper clippings, tiny ones, carefully cut. Most concerned ordinary events: a charity concert, a property sale, a missing ledger, a fire, a court hearing, a theatre closing. One headline caught my eye. Belvoir rooms to close up at 20 years another. Ownership Dispis de Lasalle another. Localman? Questioned. In connection with charity funds. I looked at Wolfe. Now we're getting somewhere. We have not yet arrived. I turned several more pages. A single event appeared repeatedly. Different names, different years, different newspaper accounts, but always the same date. October 14. That date is everywhere. Yes. Why? Find out. I kept reading. There was an article about the Bellwether Rooms. An article about a woman named Lydia Mercer. An article about a property dispute. An article about a charity committee. An article about an unexplained disappearance. The details were scattered. The connection was invisible. Yet someone had gone to considerable trouble to preserve them. I reached the final page. There was only one sentence, written in darker ink than the others. Everyone remembers the night differently. Below it was a date, October 14, 1998. I looked at Wolfe. That must be the event. You don't know. I know it is the event. What happened? I do not yet know. I closed the notebook. Where did she get this? That is the first useful question. And the second? Why did she leave it? I turned the notebook over. The back cover had a shallow indentation, a rectangular mark. I pressed it. Nothing. Then I noticed a tiny brass catch concealed beneath the leather binding. I pushed it. The back cover opened. Inside was a narrow compartment, empty, except for one strip of paper. I unfolded it. 5 words, the woman who changed her name. I looked toward Wolfe. He had gone very still. That, he said, is not a title. No, it is an illustration. Whom? To us. He took the strip from my hand. For several seconds he studied it. Then he looked toward the front door, through which Eleanor Vane had disappeared. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Find Lydia Mercer. She's the woman who says she no longer exists. Precisely. And if I find her? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then discover which name she is using now. I reached for my hat. The quiet evening was over. The Bellwether Rooms, 6 names, a dozen dates, a vanished identity, and a single night 28 years earlier had suddenly become one problem. And somewhere in New York, a woman who called herself Eleanor Vane was running from a name she claimed was no longer hers. I had the uneasy feeling that before this case was finished, we were going to discover that names were the least reliable things a person could possess. Chapter 2. The name in yesterday's newspaper. The next morning I began by doing what every private detective eventually learns to do when confronted with a woman who has too many names. I bought newspapers, not today's newspapers, yesterday's, last week's, last year's, and, eventually, enough newspapers to make the corner of Wolfe's office look like the aftermath of a small publishing strike. By 9:30 I had established 3 facts. First, Eleanor Vane had not been born Eleanor Vane. Second, Lydia Mercer had existed. Third, neither fact explained why a respectable woman named Helen Carter appeared in newspapers from another city with the same eyes, the same narrow mouth, and the same habit of holding her left shoulder slightly higher than her right. The fourth fact was that Nero Wolfe had been right. This was going to be annoying. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids. He spent 2 hours each morning among them. And I have always believed that if flowers had personalities, the orchids would have been terrified of him. At 11 he came down. He stopped at the office doorway. He looked at the newspapers, then at me. You have been productive. I have been robbed of 3 hours of my life. Explain. I found another woman. Which one? Helen Carter. He entered. That got his attention. He sat behind his desk. Who is she? That depends. On what? Which newspaper you believe. I pushed a stack toward him. Here. He opened the first clipping. Helen Carter opens bookshop in Baltimore. The article was dated March 17, 1997. A respectable little piece. Mrs. Helen Carter, 32, recently arrived from Albany, had opened a small bookshop with the assistance of her husband Thomas Carter. Wolfe read it. Thomas Carter. Yes, not in the notebook. No. Continue. The next article concerned a charity dinner. Helen Carter had donated several $100s. Another described her work with a children's reading program. Another mentioned her husband. Thomas Carter was described as a businessman involved in commercial property. Then the trail changed. In 1999, Thomas Carter disappeared from public life. No scandal, no crime, no bankruptcy. He simply stopped appearing in newspapers. The bookshop remained. Helen Carter remained. But Thomas Carter vanished. I gave Wolfe another clipping. This one was from 2001. Local Michaud relocates. Because Helen Carter was selling the bookshop, her reason was given as family circumstances. No details. Then another article. Helen Carter had left Baltimore. Her destination was not stated. Wolfe placed the clippings in chronological order. Where was she before Baltimore? That's the interesting part. You have it, Albany. Then, nothing. Almost. I handed him a photocopy. A tiny article from an Albany newspaper, dated October 15, 1998. Local charity accounting. It concerned a charity fund whose records had become confused after the resignation of its treasurer. The treasurer was named Lydia Mercer. Wolfe looked at me. Same date, October 14, 1 day later, yes. Bellwether? Not mentioned. Bell? Not mentioned. Then why is it in the notebook? Because Lydia Mercer is. He read the article again. Who was the chairman? Martin Bell? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. One of the names. Yes, and Agnes Reed, secretary. Charles Avery, legal advisor. Thomas Vale, accountant. I spread the notebook open. All 5 names appear around the same charity. Wolfe leaned back. And Helen Carter? Not mentioned. Yet she is Lydia Mercer. That's my theory. Not a theory. He tapped the newspaper. An identification. By noon I had located the first photograph. It was printed in a Baltimore Sunday supplement in June 1998. The caption read, Thomas Carter and Helen Carter at the Minchurch Charity Ball. The photograph showed a crowded ballroom. Thomas Carter stood beside a woman in a dark dress. She was smiling. The picture was grainy. The woman's hair was styled differently. Her face was fuller. But it was Eleanor Vane, no question. I had spent enough time looking at her the previous evening to know. I carried the photograph upstairs. Wolfe was eating lunch, roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, green peas. I put the photograph beside his plate. He looked at it. He stopped cutting the beef. Yes, you recognize her? No, then why yes? Because you are correct. I sat down. The woman is Eleanor Vane. Likely. Lydia Mercer. Likely. Helen Carter. Certain. I stared at him. You just said likely. I have changed my mind. That's comforting. He returned to his lunch. The man? Thomas Carter. What happened to him? He disappeared. Convenient very. Do you think he's dead? I don't know. Do you think Eleanor killed him? Wolfe looked offended. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Do not insult a problem by solving it prematurely. Sorry, you should be. He cut another piece of beef. Where was the photograph taken? Baltimore. Date? 1998. 9 months before the notebook's first major entry. Yes. Who took it? The newspaper photographer. Why? Charity ball. No. He pointed at the photograph. What? This particular photograph printed. I examined it again. There were perhaps 40 people in the ballroom. Yet the photograph had been cropped tightly around Thomas and Helen. Because they were important, perhaps. The businessman and his wife. Then what? Wolfe leaned back. The photographer wanted Thomas Carter. Why? That is what you will discover. I spent the afternoon in newspaper archives. Thomas Carter turned out to be more interesting than his disappearance. He had been born in 1958, real estate, construction, commercial properties, investments, a minor philanthropist, no criminal record, no public controversy. But his name appeared repeatedly beside properties purchased at unusually favorable prices. One building in particular caught my attention, the Bellwether Rooms. I read the article twice. Thomas Carter had attempted to purchase the property in September 1998. The sale had failed. 3 weeks later, the building changed ownership anyway. The buyer was a company called Mercer Holdings. I carried the article back to Wolfe. He was sitting in his chair with his eyes closed. Wake up. I am awake. You look dead. I am considering whether to become so. Thomas Carter tried to buy the Bellwether Rooms. His eyes opened. Interesting. Then Mercer Holdings acquired it. The company was registered 2 weeks before the sale. By whom? Charles Avery. Wolfe's expression changed. From the notebook. Yes. Who owned Mercer Holdings? That's where it gets interesting. I placed another page before him. The listed owner was Helen Carter. Silence. That's impossible. No, she wasn't a businessman. She didn't have to be. Then why put her name on it? Maybe she didn't. Wolfe stared at the page. Explain. The ownership document says Helen Carter. Signed by Helen, apparently. Compare the signature. I already did. I placed a second document beside it. Here. Wolfe studied both. One signature came from a Baltimore charity record, the other from the property transfer. He examined them for nearly a minute. 4. You think so? I know so. The signatures don't match, not merely different. He tapped the property document. This one was constructed, meaning the writer copied the appearance without understanding the movement. You can tell that? I can tell that you are standing too close. I moved back. Better? No, I moved acceptable. He returned to the signature. The person who created this wanted Helen Carter to appear to have signed, but she didn't know. Then why use her name? Because her name was useful. For what? Wolfe looked toward the notebook. That is the question. At 4 o'clock I telephoned Baltimore. At 5 I had a name. At 6 I had a file. At 7 I had a headache. The file concerned Helen Carter's bookshop. The shop had been sold in 2001. The buyer had been a woman named Margaret Ellis. That name meant nothing. Until I found the next page. Margaret Ellis had been Helen Carter's closest friend. She had also been the only person in Baltimore who publicly defended Thomas Carter after his disappearance. Then in 2003 she had written a letter to a newspaper. It contained one strange sentence. Thomas Carter did not leave voluntarily. The newspaper refused to print it, but somebody had saved the letter, and somebody had sent a copy to Eleanor Vane. The copy was dated 3 years ago. I stared at it. 3 years ago, not 20. Someone had recently reopened the history. I carried everything to Wolfe. He was having dinner. Fritz had prepared roast duck with apples. Wolfe was in no mood to be interrupted. I interrupted him anyway. Thomas Carter did not leave voluntarily. Wolfe stopped. Source: Margaret Ellis. The friend. Yes. Where is she? Dead. When? 2 years ago. Stroke. Suspicious? Probably not. Probably? She left a letter. Of course she did. He took it. Someone sent this to Mrs. Vane? Yes. 3 years ago. Wolfe read the sentence again. Then he looked at me. Someone has been preparing this case for a long time. That's what I think. No. He folded the letter. Someone has been preparing her. Who? Lydia Mercer. I stared. You think Eleanor Vane has been investigating herself? Not herself. Yes. Wolfe's gaze went to the old notebook. Because she changed her name. That doesn't explain it. It explains everything. At 8:30, precisely 24 hours after Eleanor Vane had entered the brownstone, I found another article. It was from a newspaper in Baltimore, dated October 16, 1998, 2 days after the unexplained event in Albany. The headline was small, almost invisible. Businessman abandon local project. The businessman was Thomas Carter. The project was the Bellwether Rooms. The article said he had withdrawn from the proposed purchase. No explanation, no comment. The writer mentioned that Carter had experienced a sudden change in business priorities. That phrase meant nothing until I read the next sentence. Sources close to Mr. Carter say he has also terminated several long-standing professional relationships. One of those relationships was with Charles Avery. Another was with Martin Bell. Another was with Thomas Vale. All names from Eleanor's notebook. I looked at the date again. October 16, 2 days after October 14. The same night that appeared repeatedly throughout the notebook. I had finally found the event, or at least its shadow. Wolfe listened as I explained. Something happened on October 14, 1998. Yes, at the Bellwether Rooms. Possibly. Thomas Carter learned something. Possibly. He abandoned the property. Yes. He disappeared. Later. And Eleanor Mercer became Helen Carter. No. I stopped. What? You are combining two separate acts. What acts? Changing a name and changing a history. He pointed to the newspaper photograph. Helen Carter existed. She was Eleanor, yes. But the history attached to Helen Carter was manufactured. Precisely. The charity records, the property records, the Baltimore bookshop, the photograph, the entire respectable biography. Wolfe nodded. Someone constructed Helen Carter. For her protection, or for someone else's? I looked at the notebook. Then Eleanor Vane is not the second identity. No, she's the third. Wolfe's eyes settled on me. Now you are beginning to understand. The room seemed suddenly colder. Lydia Mercer, the original, Helen Carter, the constructed history, Eleanor Vane, the present. And someone has been trying to connect them. Yes. Why? Wolfe rose slowly. He walked toward the office window. Outside? Manhattan glittered beneath a cold November sky, because one of those identities contains a secret. The October 14th event. Yes, what happened that night? He remained silent. Then he said, "We do not yet know." I waited. "But we know where to look. The bellwether rooms. Not the building. The records. Not the records." He turned. "The people." I looked again at the names in the notebook. Martin Bell, Charles Avery, Agnes Reed, Thomas Vale, Rebecca Stone, Lydia Mercer, and one more name, Thomas Carter, the businessman from the photograph, the man who had vanished, the man whose history had been quietly erased. Suddenly I understood why Wolfe had been so interested in the distinction between a changed name and a changed history. A person could change a name in an afternoon, changing everything: the newspapers, property records, acquaintances and strangers believed about that person required something much larger. It required cooperation, money, documents, time, and above all, a reason. I closed. "Tomorrow?" Wolfe nodded. "Tomorrow we find Thomas Carter, alive, if possible. And if not," he returned to his chair, "then we find out who needed him to disappear." I picked up my hat. As I reached the door, Wolfe said my name. I turned. "Yes, Archie, yes. Do not search for Eleanor Vane. Why? She is the least reliable person in this case." I wait. Search for the woman she was before someone gave her a history. I left the office with the names of 3 women in my head. Lydia Mercer, Helen Carter, Eleanor Vane. 3 names, 1 face. And somewhere between them, a man named Thomas Carter had vanished into yesterday's newspaper. Chapter 3. The House That Remembered Helen. By 10 o'clock the next morning, I had 3 addresses for Helen Carter, 2 addresses for Lydia Mercer, and 1 address for Eleanor Vane. The trouble was that none of them belonged to the same woman. I took the subway uptown with a notebook in my pocket, Wolfe's instructions in my head, and the uncomfortable feeling that I was hunting a biography rather than a person. The first address was in a neighborhood where the houses stood shoulder to shoulder, as though they had been built by a contractor who disliked empty spaces. The street had changed since 1998. The grocery on the corner was now a coffee shop. A hardware store had become a dentist's office. The old brick houses remained. So did the people. That was useful. People remember houses longer than they remember facts. I knocked on the first door. An elderly man answered. He had white hair, a brown cardigan, and the expression of somebody who regarded unexpected visitors as an insult to civilization. "Mr. Palmer?" "Yes." "Archie Goodwin. I'm looking for information about Helen Carter." He stared at me. "Helen?" "Yes." He opened the door wider. "Come in." That was encouraging. The house smelled of furniture polish and old newspapers. He led me into a sitting room where every chair appeared to have been purchased before I was born. "You knew Helen Carter?" "Everybody knew Helen." "What was she like?" He frowned. "Quiet. Very. Anything unusual? Did she have visitors?" "Never." She worked." "Doing what?" "Books." "Books?" She read them. She wrote in them. That was not what I had expected. "Did she own a bookshop?" "No." "You're certain she never owned anything?" I took out the photograph from Baltimore. "Is this her?" He looked at it. "Yes." "No doubt." "No." "How long did she live here?" "About 3 years." "Which years?" 1996 through 1999. That matched nothing. "Did she call herself Helen Carter?" "Always." "Did you know her husband?" "Thomas?" "Yes." His expression changed. "He wasn't her husband." I lowered the photograph. "What?" "Not officially." "What was he?" "A visitor." "Very." "How frequently?" 3 or 4 times a week." "Day or night?" "Mostly evening." "Did he ever stay?" "Sometimes." "Did they argue?" "No." "Did she seem afraid of him?" "Never." I closed my notebook. "One last question. What was her voice like?" He smiled faintly. "And no." "Anything distinctive?" She laughed quietly. That was all. I thanked him and left. The first, Helen Carter, was a quiet woman who lived alone and had a visitor named Thomas Carter, who was not her husband. That was already inconvenient. The second address was 6 blocks away. A woman named Mrs. Doreen Wallace answered the door. She was younger than Palmer by at least 20 years and remembered Helen immediately. Helen Carter, yes. Oh, she was something. What does that mean? Ambitious. Of how? She ran that business from the house. What business? Property? Real estate? Something like that. Did she have employees? 2. Men came and went. One was Mr. Avery. That name stopped me. Charles Avery, I think so. Another Mr. Bell. Martin Bell? She nodded. Did Thomas Carter visit? Of course. Her husband? Yes. I showed her the photograph. That's them. You are certain? Absolutely. How long did they live here? 5 years. 5? Maybe 4. When? She thought. 1997 to 2001. Different dates. Different household. Different life. I looked at the house number, then at my notes. Did Helen ever mention a bookshop in Baltimore? Mrs. Wallace laughed. Bookshop? Yes. She hated books. I stared at her. She hated books? She said books were things people used to avoid making decisions. That sounds less like the quiet woman Mr. Palmer had described. Did she have any hobbies? She entertained, often, constantly. Who attended? Business people. Men, mostly. Did she have female friends? Not many. Do you remember Margaret Ellis? No. Agnes Reed? She frowned. That name sounds familiar. From where? I don't know. Did Helen ever use another name? Mrs. Wallace looked puzzled. No, never Lydia Mercer. She shook her head. No, I thanked her. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk and considered the problem. The 2 Helens had the same face, the same photograph, the same supposed husband. But one woman lived quietly and never received visitors. The other conducted business meetings and entertained property dealers. Either the neighbors were wrong, or someone had manufactured 2 different versions of the same woman. I preferred the second explanation. It was more interesting. The third address was not a residence, it was a small office above a pharmacy. The current tenant had never heard of Helen Carter. The previous tenant had left 20 years earlier. But the pharmacist remembered an elderly clerk named Walter Finch who had kept records for the building's owner. He's retired, the pharmacist said. Where? 3 blocks away. I found Finch in a narrow apartment surrounded by boxes. When I mentioned Helen Carter, he stared at me for several seconds. Then he said, "Which one?" I smiled. That is exactly what I'm trying to discover. He invited me inside. Walter Finch had the hands of a man who had spent 40 years turning pages. I kept leases, he said. Do you still have them? Some. Do you remember Helen Carter? I remember her signature, that was promising. He disappeared into a bedroom. I heard drawers opening. A box dropped. Something heavy struck the floor. Then Finch returned carrying a folder. He placed it on the table. This is the original lease. I opened it. The tenant was Helen Carter. The date was May 1997. The address was not the address I had been given. It was on a different street entirely. I looked at Finch. Still standing. Who lived there? Helen Carter. You're certain she signed it? Did you meet her? Twice. What was she like? Businesslike. Quiet? No. Friendly? No. Confident? Very. I looked at the signature. It was unmistakably the same hand used on the forged property transfer we had examined the previous day. Or so it appeared. I placed the lease beside the photograph. Is this her? Finch studied the image. No, that stopped me. No? Not the woman I met. You're sure? Yes. Who does she resemble? Nobody. Did Helen Carter look like this? She looked older. Older by how much? 10 years. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Mr. Finch, how many Helen Carters did you know? He laughed. Only one. Then why does everyone describe a different woman? He looked at me. I wondered about that myself. When? After she left. What did you discover? Nothing, except that the landlord's copy of the lease disappeared. I looked down at the document. You're holding the original. Yes. Where did it come from? My private files. Why was it not in the property records? Because the property records were changed. By whom? I don't know. Who had access? Mr. Avery, Agin, Charles Avery. The name was beginning to appear everywhere. I returned to the brownstone shortly before 5. Wolfe was in the office. The room smelled faintly of orchids and cigar smoke. A bowl of walnuts rested beside him. He looked at me. You found the house? I found 3. Good. I handed him my notes. He read them without comment. Palmer says she lived alone. Yes. Wallace says she conducted property business. Yes. Finch says she was neither. Yes. He remembers her as older. Yes. The newspaper photograph shows another appearance. Yes. Wolfe folded the papers. You have not found 3 women. How many? 1. Then why 3 histories? He looked at me. That is the case. I sat down. I think someone created several versions of Helen Carter. Not created. Manufactured? Better. Why? Because each version served a different purpose. I leaned forward. Explain. Palmer remembers a private woman. Yes. That version provides respectability. She lived quietly. Exactly. Mrs. Wallace remembers a businesswoman. That version provides access. Yes. Finch remembers a tenant whose signature appears on a lease. That version establishes legal presence. I stared at him. So the 3 versions aren't contradictions. They are documents. Human documents. Precisely. He reached for the notebook. The notebook contains names, dates, and newspaper clippings. Yes, not memories, evidence, fragments of a manufactured history. He opened to the page containing Lydia Mercer's name. The person who changed Eleanor's history needed several people to remember her differently. Why? Because no single version could withstand examination. I thought about it. If someone checked the newspaper, they found Helen Carter in Baltimore. Yes. If they checked the lease, they found Helen Carter here. Yes. If they asked the neighbors, they received different stories. Yes. And if they investigated Lydia Mercer, they found another woman entirely. Wolfe nodded. That is how you make a person difficult to locate. Give her several histories. Exactly. I looked again at Finch's lease. There is something else. Wolfe waited. The signature. Yes. It looks like the one on the bellwether transfer. Yes. You said the transfer signature was forged. It was. But this one may be genuine. Likely. Then someone copied her genuine signature. Yes. Which means whoever forged the bellwether document had access to this lease, or to another original. Charles Avery? Possibly. Martin Bell? Possibly. Agnes Reed? Possibly. Thomas Vale? Possibly. Wolfe gave me a look. You enjoy listing suspects. It's one of my few inexpensive pleasures. You have enough suspects. Then what do we need? An event. The October 14 event. Yes. Everything points toward it. Everything. Bellwether, Lydia Mercer, Helen Carter, Thomas Carter, Charles Avery, Martin Bell, Agnes Reed, Thomas Vale, all connected. Good. So what happened? Wolfe leaned back. We do not know. That seems to be becoming a habit. Then break it, I sighed. How? Find the house where Helen Carter disappeared. I looked at him. The Baltimore house? No. The Bellwether rooms? No. The property on Finch's lease? No. Then which house? The one nobody remembers. That night I returned to the old neighborhood. There was one address I had not visited. Narrow brick house behind a church. The address had appeared once in the notebook. No newspaper mentioned it. No lease I had found referred to it. But it sat beside the date October 14, 1998. I knocked. A woman in her 70s opened the door. Her name was Ruth Mason, I said. I'm looking at Helen Carter. She did not ask which one, she said. She never lived here. Who did? She looked over my shoulder. Then, back at me, named Lydia. My pulse quickened. Lydia Mercer, she nodded. How long did she stay? One night. When? October 14, 1998. The date. There it was. Was she alone? No. Who was with her? Mr. Carter? Thomas? I don't know his first name. What happened? Mrs. Mason's face tightened. They argued. About what? Money. How long? Till after midnight. Did anyone else? 3 men. Names. She shook her head. I never learned them. Did you see Helen? I saw Lydia. Did she call herself Lydia? Yes. Did she look like Helen Carter? Mrs. Mason frowned. Who is Helen Carter? I showed her the photograph. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she said something that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. That's not the woman who was here. You're certain? Yes. But you knew Lydia Mercer? Yes. And this is not her? No. Then what did Lydia look like, Mrs. Mason pointed toward an old framed photograph hanging in the hallway. A wedding photograph. A younger Ruth Mason stood beside her husband, and beside them stood a woman. The photograph was faded, but the face was clear. I knew it immediately. It was Eleanor Vane, not Helen Carter, not the woman in the Baltimore photograph, Eleanor, the face I had seen at Wolfe's desk. The face that had told me her name was Eleanor Vane. I stared at the photograph. Mrs. Who is the woman beside you? She looked at it. Lydia. I felt the floor shift beneath me. You're certain she stayed here that night? Then why did she leave? Mrs. Mason's eyes moved toward the stairs. Because someone came for her. Who? I don't know. Man, yes. One of the three? No. Then who? She lowered her voice. Thomas Carter. But you, said the man with her, was Thomas Carter. I was wrong. How? There were two men I waited, she continued. One was Thomas, and the other? She looked frightened now. The other called her Helen. I returned to the brownstone at nearly midnight. Wolfe was awake. I put the photograph on his desk. He studied it. She told me her name was Eleanor Vane. Yes, this woman is Lydia Mercer. She looks exactly like Eleanor. Yes, she looks different from Helen Carter. Wolfe's fingers rested on the photograph. Now we know. What? The history was not merely altered. He looked up. 3 women were being made to exist. I stared, but only one woman was changing names, exactly, and Thomas Carter was present at the beginning and disappeared afterward. Goodwin. Yes? Tomorrow you will find Thomas Carter, still alive. That is what we are going to determine. And if he is, Wolfe's expression hardened, then he may be the only man left who knows why Eleanor Vane had to become Helen Carter before she became Eleanor Vane again. I looked at the photograph. 3 identities. One face. A house that remembered a name the newspapers had forgotten, and an October night that had now acquired witnesses. The mystery was no longer about a woman who had changed her name. It was about a woman whose entire past had been rewritten by people who had needed the world to remember her incorrectly. Chapter 4. The photograph in the newspaper archive. At 9 the next morning, Wolfe sent me to the newspaper archive with instructions that occupied 6 words. Find what they removed from history. That was Wolfe. He could have said, go to the archive, locate the original photograph, determine why the printed image was altered, identify everyone present, and establish its connection with the Bellwether property and Arthur Bell. Instead, he gave me 6 words and returned to his orchids. I had learned long ago that when Wolfe became economical with language, the case was becoming expensive. The newspaper archive occupied the basement of a building that had once been a printing plant and now housed enough forgotten paper to bury Manhattan under a second city. A clerk named Mr. Henshaw met me at the desk. He was thin grey and suspicious of anyone who requested newspapers older than 10 years. Which publication? Several. Dates? October 1998. That's a broad request. Not really. I put a list on the desk. Bellwether, Mercer, Carter, Avery, Bell. Henshaw looked at it. Business? Personal genealogy? Something like that. Legal? Possibly, he sighed. Then you're going to be here a while. I have a book to finish. What book? I haven't decided. He led me downstairs. The archive smelled of dust, glue, old ink, and the particular sadness of information nobody had bothered to destroy because nobody expected it to matter. We began with October 14, 1998. The first hour produced nothing. The second produced too much. There were reports of a city council meeting, a warehouse fire, a charity dinner, a miners' strike, a missing child who was later found in Queens, and a financial conference attended by several men whose names had appeared in the notebook. But there was no mention of Lydia Mercer, no mention of Helen Carter, no mention of the Bellwether rooms. That was suspicious. A major property dispute involving men as wealthy as these should have left a trace. I found one at 11:15, a small society item. Private dinner brings financial figures together. The article mentioned 4 men: Arthur Bell, Martin Bell, Charles Avery, Thomas Vale. My pulse increased. 4 names, 3 from the notebook, 1 new: Arthur Bell. The article said they had attended a private dinner at the Ashbury Club. Helen Carter was not mentioned. But there was a photograph. The printed image showed a long table beneath a chandelier. 4 men stood behind it. There was a woman beside them, or rather there should have been. Someone had cut away part of the photograph. The woman's body remained. Her face was gone. I stared at it. Interesting. Henshaw looked over my shoulder. What? Who cut this? He shrugged. Editors altered photographs all the time. Not like this. Why not? Because the rest of the picture is intact. He examined it. Maybe the face was damaged. No. You know that? Look at the edge. He leaned closer. The cut is clean. Exactly. Then someone removed it. Why? That's what I'm trying to find out. Henshaw sighed. There's an original archive upstairs. Negative if it survived. Can I see it? With permission. I showed him my identification. He looked at it, then at me. That won't help. It usually does. Not here. He walked away. I followed. The original negative was stored in a locked cabinet with thousands of others. Henshaw wore gloves. He handled the sleeve carefully. Date? October 14, 1998. Publication? The Herald. Photographer? Samuel Pike. Henshaw found the negative. We carried it to a light table. He placed it beneath the lamp. The image appeared. 4 men, a table, a chandelier, and the woman. Her face was perfectly visible. I knew her immediately. Helen Carter. But there was something wrong. She wasn't standing where the printed photograph suggested. She was beside the first man, Arthur Bell. Not Martin Bell, Arthur Bell, the financier. The man whose company had collapsed 3 years later. The man whose name had never appeared in Eleanor's notebook. I took out my notebook. Who was Arthur Bell? Henshaw shrugged. Finance. I know that. Then why ask? Because I need to know what kind. He smiled. Big. How big? Big enough that newspapers stopped laughing when his company failed. Company. Bell Financials Group. Collapsed when? 2001. Why? Accounting irregularities. I looked at the negative. Arthur Bell was smiling. Helen was not. She was looking at him, not affectionately, not fearfully. She looked as if she were waiting for him to say something. I examined the other men. Martin Bell stood to Arthur's right. Charles Avery stood behind him. Thomas Vale stood at the end of the table. The same men, the same night, the same woman, but the printed newspaper had removed her face. I asked Henshaw to make a copy. Why? I knew. He looked at me. Who is she? I said. That's what we're going to find out. I returned to the brownstone just before lunch. Wolfe was in the dining room. Fritz had prepared trout with buttered potatoes and asparagus. I entered carrying the photograph. Wolfe looked at me. Yes. What was removed? Her face. He stopped. Whose? Helen Carter. He stared at the photograph. Then he pushed his plate aside. Explain. I put the negative beside the newspaper clipping. Printed version. I tapped the first. Original. I tapped the second. The woman was standing beside Arthur Bell. Wolfe looked at the negative. Arthur Bell. Yes. Financier. Yes. Bell. Financial Group. Yes. Collapsed in 2000. Scandal. Yes. Wolfe examined the image again. Why was her face removed? That's the question. No. He looked at me. That is the second question. What is the first? Why was she photographed beside Arthur Bell? I sat down. I knew you'd say that. Good. He returned to the image. Who else was present? Martin Bell, his brother. Yes. Thomas Vale. Yes. The 4 men from the notebook. Exactly. Wolfe was silent. Then he said, and the dinner took place on October 14. Yes, the room became very quiet. Then we have found the event. I nodded. The event from the notebook. Yes, the night when Lydia Mercer was at the house. Yes, the night Thomas Carter appeared. Yes, the night these men met. Yes, and the night Arthur Bell entertained them privately. Yes. Wolfe leaned back. Now we must discover what they were discussing. That afternoon I returned to the archive. Henshaw had become more cooperative. Money oft improves human relationships. He brought me the photographer's original assignment sheet. It contained 3 lines. Private dinner. Arthur Bell. No publication without approval. That last line interested me. Who approved the photograph? Henshaw checked the file. Arthur Bell's office. Who delivered it? Charles Avery. I wrote it down. Was the photograph ever published? Yes. Without the woman's face? Apparently. Who ordered the alteration? Unknown. Was the negative returned? Not, according to the file. I looked at him. Then why was it here? He smiled. That is the mystery of archives. No, I pointed to the file. That's the mystery of someone being careless. He looked at the page. I continued. Someone wanted the face removed. Yes. But someone forgot the negative. Apparently. Who knew the negative existed? The newspaper, the photographer, Arthur Bell's office, Charles Avery. Possibly. And whoever altered the printed image? Yes. I leaned back. That's a short list. Henshaw nodded. Short lists are useful, I almost smiled. That sounded like something Wolfe would say. The next discovery was hidden in the photographer's notebook. Samuel Pike had made handwritten notes beneath the photograph. Most were technical. Lighting, exposure, lens. But beside the photograph he had written. Woman insisted on being omitted. I read it twice, then a second line. Bell told her it was unnecessary. And below that, she said the records must disappear first. I stopped breathing for a second. I read it again. The records. Not the photograph. The records. I copied the note. Then I went back to the negative. Helen Carter's expression suddenly made sense. She wasn't afraid of Arthur Bell. She was confronting him. The photograph was taken after an argument. Perhaps during one. And she had said something about records. I called Wolfe. He answered himself. Yes, I found the photographer's notes. Go on. The woman asked to be omitted. Why? She said the records must disappear first. There was silence. Then Wolfe said, return immediately. I did. Wolfe was waiting in the office. I handed him the notes. He read them. Then he read them again. That changes the problem. How? Until now we believed someone manufactured Helen Carter's history after the October event. Yes, we were wrong. You think it began before? Much before. He placed the note beside the negative. Helen Carter was not being protected from her past. Then what? Her past was being protected from her. I stared at him. Explain. Arthur Bell was a financier. Yes, his company collapsed. Yes, records vanished. Yes, property transfers became disputed. Yes, people changed names. Yes, one woman was given several histories. Yes, Wolfe's eyes hardened. All of these things suggest that the records contained something valuable. Money, perhaps. Property, possibly. Fraud, likely. Then why create Eleanor Vane? To separate the woman from the evidence. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does if the woman herself was evidence. I thought about the three identities. Lydia Mercer, Helen Carter, Eleanor Vane. She was present at the dinner. Yes. She knew Bell. Yes. She knew the others. Yes. She knew about the records. Yes. Then she became Helen Carter. Perhaps. Why? Because Helen Carter was respectable. And Lydia Mercer wasn't? Necessarily. Then why? Because Lydia Mercer had a documented connection to the charity and Helen Carter had a property history. Yes. Different identity for different purpose. Exactly. I looked at him. Someone was building identities around her, or she was cooperating. You think Eleanor helped create her own history? I think she may have had no choice. Because of Bell. Because of what Bell knew. That evening I returned to the newspaper archive one last time. I asked for everything concerning Arthur Bell between 1997 and 2001. There were dozens of articles. Most were financial. Well. Then I found something unexpected. A report dated November 3, 1998. 3 weeks after the private dinner. Bell Company moves records to private storages. The article was brief. It said Bell Financial Group had moved several years of accounting records from its downtown office to an undisclosed storage facility. The reason was administrative consolidation. The records were never seen again, or so the newspaper said. I found another article. December 1998. Bell Partnership under another. January 1999. Private audit begins another. March. Audit ends without public report and then nothing. Arthur Bell continued his business for 2 more years. Then his company collapsed. I looked at the dates. The private dinner, the missing records, the hidden audit, the eventual collapse, and Helen Carter was present at the beginning. I returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was upstairs. I waited. When he came down, I placed the articles before him. He read them. Arthur Bell moved the records 3 weeks after the dinner, yes. Then the audit began, yes, and ended without a report. Yes, Wolfe sat down. Now we have motive. For hiding the records, for hiding the woman. I sat opposite him. Who was Arthur Bell protecting? Not himself. How do you know? Because he kept the records. Why would a guilty man keep evidence? He wouldn't, unless he needed it. Correct. Leverage. Perhaps. Against whom? Wolfe looked at the photograph. That is the question. He tapped Arthur Bell's face. Bell was not merely hiding records. He was preserving them. For what? Protection. Against someone. Yes. I thought of the 4 men. Arthur Bell, Martin Bell, Charles Avery, Thomas Vale, and the woman, Helen Carter. 5 people, 1 private dinner, 1 missing set of records, 1 altered photograph, 1 woman whose face had been erased, and 1 man who later vanished. Thomas Carter. Where does Thomas Carter fit? Wolfe looked at me. Perhaps he was not Helen's husband. Mrs. Palmer said that. Perhaps he was an associate of Bell, possibly. Then why did he disappear? Because he knew the records went. I sat forward. Then Eleanor may know. Yes, and someone is trying to make her remember, or trying to make her forget. I looked at the photograph again. The original showed Helen standing beside Arthur Bell. The printed version showed no face. The difference between them was only a few inches of paper, but those inches contained an entire hidden history. At 10 that night, the telephone rang. I answered. A man's voice said, "Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes. You've been asking about Helen Carter." "Who is this?" "Stop. That's not an answer. You don't know what you're looking for. Perhaps you can help. I can do more than that." "Then do this." "What?" "Tell Wolfe the photograph was never supposed to survive." The line went dead. I stood beside the telephone. Wolfe looked at me. "Who? Unknown. What did he say?" I repeated it. Wolfe's face remained calm, but his eyes changed. "The negative. Yes, he knows we found it, apparently. Then we are no longer investigating the past." "What are we investigating?" "The person protecting it." The following morning I returned to the archive. The negative was gone. The drawer was locked. The file remained. The negative had disappeared. I found Henshaw at his desk. He looked sick. "It was here yesterday." "I know. Nobody should have been able to remove it." "Somebody did." "How?" I looked at the cabinet. "With a key. Only 3 people have one." "Names?" He hesitated. "Me, the chief archivist." And he looked at me. "Arthur Bell's old legal representative, Charles Avery." Henshaw nodded. I said nothing. I did not need to. The photograph had led us to Arthur Bell. Arthur Bell had led us to the missing records. The missing records had led us to the private dinner. The private dinner had led us to Helen, and the disappearance of the negative had led us straight back to Charles Avery. When I returned to Wolfe, he was watering an orchid. He listened without interruption. Then he set down the watering can. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes?" "Tomorrow we visit Charles Avery. Will he talk?" "No." "Then why visit him?" Wolfe adjusted one leaf. "Because people who refuse to talk often reveal more when they believe the question is already answered." I put on my coat. "Anything else?" "Yes." "What?" "Find out whether Arthur Bell is dead." I stopped. "I thought he was." "I did not say find his grave." He looked at me. "Find out whether Arthur Bell is dead." I understood. A financier's company could collapse. Records could vanish. A photograph could be altered. A woman could acquire 3 identities. A man could disappear from public life. But Wolfe had finally noticed the most important fact. Nobody had yet proved that Arthur Bell had disappeared in the same way as Thomas Carter. And if Arthur Bell was still alive, then somewhere in New York there was a man who had spent nearly 3 decades knowing exactly why Helen Carter's face had been cut from a photograph. The next morning, I intended to find him. Chapter 5. The ledger with 3 signatures. George Mason lived above a bakery on a street where the smell of bread was strong enough to make a man forgive New York for almost anything. I found him at 11 in the morning. He was 71, broad in the shoulders, bald on top, and wearing suspenders that looked as though they had been designed during the Harding administration and had never been replaced because they had done nothing wrong. He opened the door only after I showed him my identification. "Arthur Bell," I said. His expression closed. "I don't discuss him. That's unfortunate." "For whom?" "For me." "Then we agree." He began to close the door. I put my shoe in the gap. "I've been Nero Wolfe." The door stopped. Mason stared at me. "That's supposed to mean something?" "Usually." He opened the door. "Come in." His apartment was clean but crowded. Filing cabinets occupied one wall. Books occupied another. A small dining table stood beneath a window overlooking the bakery's delivery entrance. He pointed toward a chair. "Sit." I sat. He remained standing. "You have 10 minutes. I may need 11. You get 10. I want to know about Bell Financial Group. I've forgotten it. Accountants don't forget ledgers. I forgot the company." "Did you forget Arthur Bell?" "No." "Did you forget Martin Bell?" "No." "Charles Avery?" "No." "Thomas Vale?" Mason's face tightened. "No." "Good. Then we have something to work with." He sat opposite me. "What do you want?" "Records." "Which records?" "One ledger." His eyes moved toward the filing cabinets, only for a second. But I noticed. So did he. You know about it. I know there were many ledgers. This one disappeared. Records disappear. Not when accountants are responsible for them. He looked at me. You've been talking to someone. Several someones. Who? That's my business. Then you're wasting your time. Maybe. I leaned back. Do you remember a woman named Helen Carter? His expression changed. Yes. Lydia Mercer. Another change. Yes. Eleanor Vane. He stared at me. No. That answer came too quickly. I smiled. That's interesting. What? You said no before I finished. I know the name. From where? Newspaper. Only that? Yes. Then why are you nervous? I'm 71. I'm nervous about everything. That was almost convincing. Almost. I took out a copy of the photograph from the archive. I placed it on the table. He looked at it. Arthur Bell. Yes. Martin Bell. Charles Averills. Yes. Thomas Vale. Yes. Helen Carter. He said nothing. I pointed to the woman. Who was she? Helen Carter. Only Helen Carter. Yes. You're certain? He looked at me. Why wouldn't I be? Because she had 3 names. Mason stood. That's enough. No, I said enough. He turned toward the door. I remained seated. Mr. Mason. What? Arthur Bell's records contain 3 signatures belonging to the same woman. He froze. I had guessed. His silence confirmed it. You know about them? He slowly turned around. Who told you? No one. Then how? Because the woman changed names. He stared at me. Who are you working for, Nero Wolfe? Mason sat down again. This time, he looked tired. You should leave. I'll give you 5 minutes. He had said 10. I spent 5. He almost smiled. Then he rubbed his forehead. All right. Bell kept everything, Mason said. Everything. Copies, contracts, receipts, letters, notes, personal memoranda. Why? Arthur Bell trusted paper more than people. Smart man, not smart enough. What was the ledger? A private accounting book. What made it different? It wasn't part of the company books. Then what was it? Mason looked toward the window. A record of payments. To whom? People. Which people? Some were legitimate. Some were not. Bribes? Sometimes political? No. Business? Mostly. Property? His eyes met. Mine. Yes. The bellwether rooms? He did not answer. I waited. Finally, he said, yes. Who received money? That is where the names become important. Go on. There were 3 columns. Payments, names. 3 names. No. 3 identities. I leaned forward. Whose? Mason said nothing. I knew. Helen Carter. Lydia Mercer. Another nod. Eleanor Vane. His face had gone pale. Yes. I sat back. So it was all one woman? Yes. Not 3 women? No. Who knew Bell? Avery? Yes. Vale? Yes. Martin Bell? Yes. Thomas Carter? Mason looked at me. Yes. That name landed heavily. What did Thomas Carter know? Enough to disappear. Did he die? Mason shook his head. I don't know. Did Arthur Bell know? Yes. Where did Thomas go? I don't know. You said the ledger contained the names. It did. Then it may contain his location. Not necessarily. Why? Because the ledger was not only about money. What else? Protection. I took out my notebook. Explain. Mason leaned forward. Arthur Bell had enemies. Many? Enough. Business rivals. Some criminal. No. Partners. That was worse. He looked toward the kitchen. Bell discovered that several property transactions were fraudulent. The bellwether rooms? Among others. Who was responsible? Mason hesitated. Not Bell. Then who? People working around him. Avery? Yes. Vale? Yes. Martin Bell? Perhaps. Arthur's brother? Yes. Why would Arthur keep them? Proof. And the woman? Mason's eyes dropped to the photograph. She was the bookkeeper. I stared. Helen Carter. That was one. Mercer. Another. Eleanor Vane. The last. What did she do? She tracked. She knew where it went. Yes. She made the ledger? She maintained it. Then she was dangerous. Very. To Bell? To everyone, I asked. Why 3 names? Mason rubbed his hands together. Protection. For herself? Yes. Who created the identities? Bell. Not her. Both. How different records were established in different places. She became Helen Carter in Baltimore. Yes. Lydia Mercer in Albany. Yes. Eleanor Vane later. Yes. Why the different the evidence? Meaning, if someone found Helen Carter, they would find property records. If they found Lydia Mercer, charity records. Eleanor Vane, nothing. That was the point. He looked at me. She was supposed to become invisible. Instead, someone is looking for her. Yes, who? Mason swallowed. I don't know. I believed him, for once. What happened to the ledger? Mason's expression changed. It disappeared. When? October 1998. The 14th. He looked at me. Yes. From Bell's office? Yes. Who removed it? I don't know. You were the accountant. I wasn't there. Where were you? Hospital. Why? Appendix. I smiled. Convenient. I almost died. Less convenient. He ignored that. After I returned, the ledger was gone. Who had access? Bell, Martin, Avery, and the woman. Helen, whatever name she was using, she could have taken it. Yes, would she? To protect herself or Bell, yes, or someone else. Yes, I closed my notebook. Did Arthur Bell report it missing? No. Why? He couldn't. Why not? Mason looked directly at me. Because Bell had already disappeared. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. When? October 14, the same night. Yes, then Thomas Carter disappeared too, not immediately, but afterward. Yes, and the woman? She disappeared as Lydia Mercer, then became Helen Carter, and later Eleanor Vane. I stood. Mr. Mason. Yes? Why did you agree to speak to me? He looked toward the photograph. Because I'm tired. Tired of what? Remembering 3 women who were one. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the dining room. He was eating roast chicken. I stood beside the table. Arthur Bell had a private ledger. Wolfe continued eating. It contained payments connected to property transactions. He chewed. 3 identities appeared in it. His fork stopped. Helen Carter, Lydia Mercer, Eleanor Vane. Wolfe put down his fork. Continue. All 3 were the same woman. I know. No. He looked at me. You suspected. I knew. That's different. Yes. George Mason confirmed it. Good. The ledger disappeared October 14, 1998. Naturally, Arthur Bell disappeared that same night. Wolfe leaned back. Now we have a serious problem. I thought we had one already. We had a woman with several names. And now we have a missing financier, a missing ledger, and a woman whose identities were deliberately constructed. What's the problem? The ledger may have been taken by the woman. Why? Because she needed it. For protection, possibly. Then, why did she leave a trail? She may not have, I understood. Someone else created the trail. Yes, the notebook. Yes, the newspaper clippings. Yes, the photograph. Yes, someone is trying to reconstruct her. Exactly. Wolfe rose. He walked toward the window. Archie. Yes? How many people have we met who remember Helen Carter? 5. How many remember Lydia Mercer? 2. Eleanor Vane? Only us. That is wrong. Because, if someone is recreating the history, someone must know the final identity. Who? That is what we will find. I followed him toward the office. He stopped beside the desk. The 3 names are not disguises. No, they are compartments. For what? Evidence. Each identity contained a separate portion of the history. Yes. So if one identity was exposed, the others survived. Precisely. And the ledger brought them together. Yes. Which means whoever took the ledger possessed the key to all 3 identities. Wolfe nodded. Correct. I looked at the notebook. Then the person who is sending the messages wants Eleanor to remember. Perhaps. Or wants her to believe someone else remembers. Better, I frowned. What does that mean? Wolfe sat down. The messages are not merely threats. Then what? Instruction, the notebook. Yes. The photograph, yes. The newspaper clippings, yes. The missing ledger. Yes, they are leading her. Somewhere. Exactly. Where? Wolfe's expression was grim. To the place where the 3 identities were created. The Bellwether Rooms? No. The old Albany House? No. Arthur Bell's office? No. He looked at me. I stared at him. The ledger is the place? No. The ledger tells us where. Yes. And Mason didn't tell us. He could not. Because he never knew. I thought of the old accountant's face. He said the ledger contained 3 identities. Yes. But he didn't say where it was taken. No. Then someone else knows. Wolfe nodded. Someone who has been waiting 28 years. At 7 that evening the telephone rang. I answered. A woman's voice said, Mr. Goodwin. I knew it immediately. Eleanor? There was silence. Then don't use that name. I sat straighter. Where are you? I shouldn't have called. Are you safe? No. Who's after you? I don't know. Then tell me what you do know. I found something. What? A letter. From whom? Arthur Bell. My hand tightened around the receiver. Where did you find it? I can't say. Why? Because someone is listening. I looked toward Wolfe. He had heard every word. Tell me one thing, I said. What? Did Arthur Bell write about the ledger? Silence. Then she whispered. He wrote that it was never a ledger. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver. Wolfe looked at me. What did she say? I told him. He closed his eyes. For several seconds he did not move. Then he said, that explains the 3 signatures. How? The ledger was not accounting. Then what was it? Wolfe opened his eyes. A map? Of what? People. I frowned. People? Which identity was used where? For what purpose? To move documents. Documents from Bell's company? Yes. Where? Wolfe looked at the old photograph of Arthur Bell. That is what the final pages will tell us. The final pages? Yes. You think they're still there? I think someone has been protecting them. Who? Wolfe's gaze moved to the notebook, then to the photograph, then to the telephone. The same person who has been trying to make Eleanor Vane remember who she was. I waited. Tomorrow, Wolfe said, we find the last surviving signature, and then we find out where the ledger went. I reached for my coat. As I opened the door, Wolfe stopped me. Archie, yes? One more thing. What? Do not assume the woman wants to be found, I nodded, because suddenly I understood the danger. Eleanor Vane had not spent 28 years escaping one name. She had spent 28 years surviving 3. And somewhere between Lydia Mercer, Helen Carter, and Eleanor Vane was a missing ledger that could prove not only who she had been, but who had decided she needed to become someone else. Chapter 6. The woman who returned as someone else. Eleanor Vane returned to the brownstone at 10 minutes after 9 the following morning, which was an improvement over her first visit in one respect. This time she rang the bell only once. I opened the door. She stood on the stoop wearing a dark blue coat, no hat, and the expression of a woman who had spent the night arguing with herself and had lost. Mr. Goodwin, you're early. I know. Wolfe is upstairs. I know. That stopped me. You know. She looked past me into the hall. I've been watching the house. That is not reassuring. I wasn't watching you. That is supposed to be reassuring? No. She stepped inside. I closed the door. You called yesterday. Yes. You said you found a letter from Arthur Bell. Yes. Where is it? She looked at me. I don't have it. Then where is it? With the person who gave it to me. Who? I don't know. I stared at her. You have a remarkable talent for making a simple sentence complicated. She almost smiled. Then the smile disappeared. Is Wolfe ready? He has been ready since yesterday. She followed me upstairs. Wolfe was behind his desk. A vase of orchids stood on the table beside him. He had been inspecting them with the concentration of a jeweler examining diamonds. He looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Vane. She stopped. My name is not Vane. I know. She swallowed. My name is Helen. Move. I did. I looked at her, then at Wolfe, then back at her. You're Helen Carter? Yes. The woman from Baltimore? Yes. The woman in the photograph? Yes. The woman who lived under the name Lydia Mercer? Yes. The woman who came here as Eleanor Vane? Yes. She closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Wolfe pointed toward the chair. Sit. She sat. I took my chair. Wolfe folded his hands. You have lied to us. I know. Why? Because I was afraid. That is not an excuse. Correct. She looked toward me. I never intended to deceive you. You walked into this house under a false name. I know. You allowed us to investigate a woman who did not exist. She did exist. As a legal identity. Yes. Not as a person. Wolfe's voice remained calm. Then tell us who you are. She drew a breath. My real name is Helen Carter. Your original name? No. Then what is your original name? She looked down. Lydia Mercer, I said. You just said Helen Carter was your real name. It is. That sounds like 3 answers. It is one answer. I waited. She looked at Wolfe. Names are not simple things. I am aware. Lydia Mercer was the name I was born with. Good. Helen Carter was the name I used when I disappeared, and Eleanor Vane, the name I used when I needed to disappear again. Wolfe nodded. Now we can begin. She did not begin with the night of October 14. She began with money. That was sensible. People tell lies about money more carefully than they tell lies about almost anything else. My father for Arthur Bell, she said. Doing what? I asked. Accounting. Like George Mason, before Mason. What was your father's name? Edward Mercer. I wrote it down. Was he involved in Bell Financial? Yes. For how long? Nearly 12 years. And you? I worked there part-time while studying, accounting, records, which records? Property, transactions. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. What property? The ones Arthur Bell acquired through intermediary companies. Bellwether? Among them. Was Bell committing fraud? She shook her head. Not in the beginning. Then when, after he discovered what Martin Bell and Charles Avery were doing, his brother and lawyer. Yes. What were they doing? Moving ownership. Explain. She folded her hands. Properties were being bought cheaply by companies that appeared unrelated. Then Honeycourt sold them at inflated values. The profits were divided. Who benefited? A small group. Bell, sometimes. Martin? Yes. Avery? Yes. Vale? Yes. Thomas Carter? She hesitated. Thomas Carter was not part of it. I looked at Wolfe. That was interesting. Then why was he involved? He found out. How? I told him. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You knew Thomas Carter? Yes. You were not his wife? No. You were his accountant? No. Then what were you? She looked toward the window. His friend. Only. At first, I let that pass. Wolfe did not. Continue. Thomas had discovered that some of the properties were being transferred through false ownership records. He was a property broker. He recognized the pattern. The Bellwether rooms? Yes. Was that the important property? No. Which was? The Bellwether rooms were only the beginning. I wrote that down. Where were the important records? In Bell's private office. Then why did the ledger matter? Because it connected the names, the 3 names. Yes. She looked at me. That ledger was the only record that showed I had been involved. Under all 3 names? Yes. Why would you need 3 names? Because Arthur Bell had created them. Wolfe interrupted. Why? She looked at him. Because he was protecting me. From whom? From the men who were stealing the properties. That is incomplete, she nodded. I know. I leaned forward. Let's get this straight. Arthur Bell discovered the fraud. You discovered it too. You maintained records. Bell created several identities for you. Then Thomas Carter discovered the same scheme. Correct? Why did you become Helen Carter? Because Lydia Mercer was known to the company. Too dangerous. Yes, Helen Carter had no connection to Bell, exactly, and Eleanor Vane. That came later, after Bell disappeared. Yes. Why? Because people were still looking for the ledger, I said. What happened to it? She looked at me. I don't know. You expect us to believe that. I have spent 28 years trying to find it. Yet you knew it existed. Yes. You maintained it. Yes. You knew what it contained. Partly. And you don't know where it went? No, Wolfe said. Who removed it? I don't know. Who could? Arthur, Martin, Avery, Vale, Thomas, and you. She nodded. Who had access that night? All of us. Where was the ledger? In Arthur Bell's private office. Locked? Yes. Who had it? Arthur. Puce? Thomas? You? No. Then how could you have removed it? I couldn't. Yet you were there, yes. At the office? Yes. On October 14? Yes. I wrote the date. At what time? About 9. 9 in the morning? No. Night? Yes. Why? She hesitated. Arthur Bell asked me to come. For what? He said the situation had changed. How? He had discovered that someone was preparing to expose him. Who? He didn't say. Was it Martin Bell? I don't know. Charles Avery? I don't know. Thomas Vale? I don't know. Thomas Carter? She looked at me. How do you know? Because Thomas was with me. That got my attention. Where? At a house in Albany. The Mason House. Yes. I looked at Wolfe. He remained still. At what time? Before midnight. That night? Yes. Then how could you have been in Bell's office at 9? She stared at me. I left. When? About 10. You left Albany at 10? Yes. And went to Bell's office? Yes. In New York? Yes. I calculated. That's impossible. She closed her eyes. I know. Wolfe spoke. How did you travel? Train. What time? 15 from Albany. Yes. You arrived in New York? After midnight. Then you could not have been at Bell's office at 9. I know. Room went silent. I looked at Wolfe. He was watching her, not angrily, not triumphantly. Simply watching. Mrs. Carter, he said. You have just told us the one thing that makes your account impossible. She looked at him. I know. Then why tell it? Because that is how I remembered it. Memory is not a timetable. No. What happened at 9? She looked toward the floor. I was at the office. Impossible. Yes. Then you were not in Albany. I was. At the same time, she whispered. Yes, I stood. Are you telling us there were 2 of you? No. Then who was at the office? She said nothing. Wolfe said, "Sit down, Archie." I sat. Wolfe looked at Helen. "You have told the truth about the names." She nodded. "You have told the truth about the ledger." Another nod. "You have told the truth about Thomas Carter." She hesitated. "Mostly." "Ah." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "That word is important. I didn't want to involve him." "Why?" "Because he was innocent of the fraud." "Yes, but not of the deception." "No." She looked at her hands. "Thomas helped me with the identities." "Yes, which means he knew Helen Carter was not your original name." "Yes, he knew Lydia Mercer." "Yes, and Eleanor Vane, later." "Then why did he disappear?" She swallowed. "Because he believed the ledger was going to destroy everyone." "Who did he fear?" "Arthur Bell." "Why?" "Because Arthur knew Thomas had copies." "Copies of what?" "The property records," I said. "Where are they?" She looked at me. "I don't know," Wolfe said. "You do know. You know enough to be frightened." She did not answer. Wolfe reached for the photograph. He placed the image of Arthur Bell and Helen Carter on the desk. "You were here, yes. At the private dinner, yes. You asked for your face to be removed." "Yes." "Why?" "Because Arthur told me the photograph would become evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That I knew him." "That alone is not significant." "Not the photograph." She touched the table. "The original. What was behind it?" She shook her head. "I don't know." Wolfe studied her. "You are lying." She looked at him. "About what?" "The records." She said nothing. The ledger was not merely an accounting record. No, it contained a map. She looked startled. That was the first genuine surprise I had seen from her. "You know?" "Yes." "What?" "That it linked entities to transactions." She nodded slowly. "It did." "Then where is it?" "I don't know." "Who took it?" "I don't." "Who had it last?" She hesitated. "Arthur." "Then where did he go?" "I don't know." "Was he alive when you left?" She looked at Wolfe. "Yes, that changed everything." I said, "You told us Arthur Bell disappeared." "I said he disappeared." "Meaning he was alive?" "Yes." "After October 14? "Yes." "How long?" "I don't know." "Where did he go?" "He left the city." "Alone?" "No, with whom?" She looked at me. "Thomas Carter." I sat back. "Thomas was with Arthur after the office." "Why?" "Arthur wanted to negotiate." "About the ledger?" "Yes." "With Thomas?" "Yes." "What happened?" "I don't know." "You weren't there?" "No." "Then how do you know?" "Thomas told me." "When?" "Years later." "Where?" "Chicago." "Thomas was alive?" "Yes." "Why did you say you didn't know what happened to him?" "I didn't say he was dead." "You let us believe it." "Because I wanted to protect him." Wolfe said. "From whom?" She looked at him. "From me." That answer stopped all of us. Wolfe sat back. Now we reached the reason. Helen Carter looked exhausted. "I changed my name because I was afraid." "That is not the reason." "It is." "No." Wolfe's voice became harder. "You changed your name because someone wanted you to." She did not respond. "You changed it because the identity of Lydia Mercer had become dangerous." "Yes." "You became Helen Carter because that identity was useful." "Yes." "You became Eleanor Vane because Helen Carter had become dangerous." "Yes, but you did not change your name merely to hide." She looked at him. "Then why?" She closed her eyes. "When Arthur Bell disappeared, he left instructions." "For yes." "What instructions?" "Never use Lydia Mercer again." "Why?" "Because Lydia Mercer was connected to the ledger." "How?" "Her signature appeared 3 times, under different names." "Yes." "One of those signatures was genuine." "And was copied." "Yes." "And one," she looked at Wolfe, "was mine." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I signed something as Eleanor Vane before Eleanor Vane legally existed." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Impossible." "I know." There it was again. The word. Impossible. The same word she had used about the journey from Albany. The same word that had appeared twice in 24 hours. Wolfe noticed. "So that is the lie." She looked at him. "Yes." "The lie is not that you changed your name." "No." "The lie is not that the ledger disappeared." "No." "The lie is not that you were in Albany." She looked frightened. "What is the lie?" Wolfe leaned forward. "You are pretending that your identities were created one after another." She stared at him. They were not. Silence. They existed simultaneously. Her face lost its color. I understood before she answered. "You didn't become Eleanor Vane after Helen Carter." "No." "You were Eleanor Vane while you were Helen Carter." "Yes." "And Lydia Mercer." "Yes." 3 legal identities. "Yes." "At the same time." "Yes." Wolfe nodded. "Now the ledger makes sense." Helen began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. The tears simply appeared. "I didn't create them." "Who did?" "Arthur." "Why?" because he needed someone who could move through different records without connecting them. To move documents? Yes. Money? Sometimes. Property? Mostly. Evidence? Yes, which means you were not merely hiding from the conspiracy. No, you were part of its machinery. She looked at him. I was trying to stop it. By helping Belle, I had no choice. You always have a choice. Not then. Wolfe said nothing. After a moment she continued. Arthur told me that if I refused, Martin and Avery would destroy my father's records. Your father knew? Yes. So, was he alive? When did he die? In 97, before the identities were created. Yes. Then Belle had access to his records. Yes. And used them to construct Lydia Mercer. Yes. Why Helen Carter? Because there was already a Helen Carter. I looked at her. Who? A dead woman. That explained the manufactured history. Someone whose records could be used. Yes. How old was she? 29. How did she die? Accident. And Belle used her identity. Yes. Then Helen Carter was not your name. No, it was hers. Yes. And you borrowed it. Yes. With her records. Yes. Wolfe nodded. Now we have it, I asked. What happened on October 14? Helen looked toward the window. I went to Belle's office because Arthur told me he had discovered the ledger was missing. At 9? Yes. But you were in Albany, later with Thomas. Yes. Who was at the office? She hesitated. A woman. Which woman? Helen Carter. I stared. She looked at me, not me. Then who? I don't know. Wolfe's voice became very quiet. You do. Helen shook her head. No. You have spent 28 years protecting her. I don't know who she was. Yes. You do. She looked at the photograph. The woman at the office was wearing my clothes. I felt a chill. She was impersonating you. Yes. Who? I never saw her face. Then how do you know she was a woman? Because I saw her from behind, Wolfe said. And Arthur Bell knew. Yes. Which means the missing ledger was not stolen by you. No, it was stolen by the woman impersonating you. Yes. To make you appear responsible. Yes. Why? Helen looked at him. Because if the ledger disappeared while I was supposed to be in Bell's office, everyone would believe I took it. Wolfe's expression hardened, and that was the purpose of the second identity. She nodded. Someone wanted the world to believe Helen Carter had stolen the ledger. And you were actually in Albany, yes. Thomas, yes, which gives you an alibi. Yes, but only if someone knows. You were not Helen Carter. She looked at Wolfe. Exactly. For the first time since she entered the room, Wolfe smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally found the missing piece. Mrs. Carter. She looked at him. You have told the truth about changing your name. Yes. You have told the truth about the ledger. Yes. You have told the truth about Thomas Carter. Yes, but you have not told the truth about why you changed your name. She looked down. Why? Because you did not change it to hide from the people who wanted the ledger. Wolfe pointed toward the photograph. You changed it to hide from the person who already had it. Helen's eyes filled with fear. Who? That is what we shall determine, she whispered. I don't know. Wolfe leaned back. But you have seen her? No. Yes. At the house in Albany. Helen went rigid. The woman who called herself Lydia Mercer. I was Lydia Mercer, not that night. She stared at him. Who was there? Wolfe continued. The woman who appeared at Bell's office wearing your clothes. Helen said nothing. The woman who knew about the ledger. Silence. The woman who knew where Thomas Carter was. Helen's face had gone white. Who was she? Wolfe looked at her. Someone who had access to all three identities. He paused. And someone who knew that Helen Carter was not merely a name. I leaned forward. Wolfe did not answer. Not yet. Instead, he turned to me. Archie, yes? Find the original Helen Carter. I stared. She's dead. Then find the record of her death. You think it was forged? He looked at Helen. I require proof. Helen rose slowly. Will you help me? Wolfe regarded her for a long moment. That depends on what? Whether you continue telling me the truth. She nodded. I will. She reached for her coat. At the door she stopped. Mr. Wolfe, yes? Arthur Bell is alive. I turned. What? She looked at Wolfe. I saw him 6 years ago. Where? Wolfe's expression did not change. Why did you not tell us? Because he told me if I ever revealed he was alive, the ledger would disappear forever. Where is he now? I don't know. Who was with him? She hesitated. Charles Avery. Then she left. I wait until the door closed. London. Wolfe nodded. 6 years ago. Bell is alive, apparently. Charles Avery was with him, apparently, and the ledger. Still missing. I looked at the empty chair where Helen had been sitting. She told the truth about the names. Yes, the ledger. Thomas, yes, but not the reason she changed her name. No. Why did she? Wolfe rose. He walked toward the stairs. Because she was not hiding from the past, Archie. He paused. She was hiding from someone who had survived it. I followed him. And that person? Wolfe looked toward the orchids. We shall find out. He began climbing the stairs. After lunch, I looked at the clock. It was 11:40. You're thinking about lunch? I am always thinking about lunch. That, at least, was reassuring. The case had acquired 3 names. 1 missing ledger, 2 vanished men, a counterfeit woman, a surviving financier, and a lie buried inside an otherwise truthful confession. But the worst part was yet to come. Because Helen Carter had finally told us who she was. And by doing so, she had given us the first solid reason to believe that the woman we had been searching for all along was not Eleanor Vane. She was the person who had been using Eleanor Vane's identity. And somewhere, possibly still in New York, that person had been waiting for us to discover exactly that. Chapter 7. Wolfe removes the masks. By noon, the brownstone had acquired the atmosphere of a courthouse and the smell of a very good lunch. The courthouse part was Archie Goodwin's fault. The lunch was Fritz's. Wolfe had ordered roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, buttered carrots, a salad of endive and watercress, and a dessert that involved pears, cream, and enough sugar to make a dentist reconsider his profession. Fritz had also put a pot of coffee on the sideboard. I was not hungry. This was unusual. Wolfe noticed. You are not eating. I've got too much on my mind. That is not an excuse. It is when the mind is full of people who have been dead, people who are supposed to be dead, people who changed names, and people who may have been impersonating people who changed names. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. Then eat. It will simplify the mind. That was Wolfe's solution to most human difficulties. I sat at the table. He did not. He stood beside his desk, looking at the assembled evidence. The newspaper photograph, the altered lease, the notebook, the 3 signatures, George Mason's statement, Helen Carter's confession, and a telegram that had arrived 20 minutes earlier from a private investigator in London. I had read it twice. Wolfe had read it once. The telegram confirmed that Arthur Bell had indeed been alive 6 years earlier. It also confirmed something else. He had been traveling under the name Arthur Bennett. The address given for the hotel was a dead end. He had checked out 3 days after arriving, but the registration card carried a signature, Arthur Bell's signature, the same hand, the same peculiar capital B. Wolfe had circled it in pencil. Now he looked at the group assembled in his office. George Mason sat near the window. Inspector Kramer occupied the large chair beside the door. Helen Carter sat opposite Wolfe. I stood near the mantel. Kramer looked at me. Why am I here? Because Wolfe invited you. I know that. Then we're both informed. Kramer grunted. I don't like mysteries that require invitations. You'd rather have one delivered by a corpse? Goodwin, yes? Shut up. That's the friendliest thing you've said all morning. Wolfe ignored us. He touched the photograph. Mr. Mason. Mason looked at him. You told Archie that Bell's private ledger contained 3 names. Yes. 3 identities. Yes. Helen Carter. Yes. Lydia Mercer. Yes. Eleanor Vane. Yes. You believed they belonged to one woman. They did. Wolfe turned to Helen. Mrs. Carter, you have confirmed that. Yes. Now I will tell you something neither of you has understood. Mason shifted in his chair. Helen looked frightened. Kramer looked annoyed. I looked at Wolfe. That made 4 of us. Wolfe said, there were never 3 identities. I frowned. Mason stared. Helen went still. Kramer said, what? Wolfe continued. There were 3 records. He pointed to the first signature. 1 identity existed for property. The second, 1 for money. The third, 1 for protection. He looked at Helen. All 3 belonged to the same person. Helen nodded. Yes, but they were not created to conceal you from the world. Her expression changed. No, they were created to conceal the transaction from the world. She lowered her eyes. Kramer leaned forward. What transaction? Wolfe looked at him. That is why I asked you here. The room became silent. Outside, a truck rattled over the street and a horn sounded twice. New York continued its business. Inside the brownstone, Wolfe had stopped time. He pointed to the altered newspaper photograph. On October 14th, 28 years ago, Arthur Bell held a private dinner. Kramer nodded. With Martin Bell, Charles Avery, Thomas Vale, and Helen Carter. Correct. Yet the published photograph removed Helen's face. Correct. Why? Kramer said. Because someone didn't want her identified. No, Wolfe shook his head. That is the obvious conclusion. And it's entirely. He turned to Helen. Who requested the photograph be altered? She hesitated. I did. I stared at her. You? Yes. Kramer looked at her. Why? Because Arthur told me to. Wolfe said. Helen looked at him. I told the photographer to remove my face. Yes. Arthur merely permitted it. She lowered her head. Yes. Wolfe nodded. That is the first mask, I said. What does that mean? The photograph did not hide Helen from Arthur. He tapped the image. It hid Arthur from anyone who might later recognize the woman standing beside him. That doesn't make sense. It does if the woman was expected to appear elsewhere, under another identity. Mason leaned forward. Helen was already using Lydia Mercer. Yes, but why? Because of the transaction. Wolfe opened a folder. He removed a copy of an old lease. The lease George Mason had mentioned. The signature was unmistakable. Helen Carter. But the address was wrong. I had seen it before. At the old neighborhood. The house people remembered. The house that was supposed to have belonged to Helen Carter. Except it hadn't. Wolfe placed the lease beside the photograph. The lease is dated March 1998. Helen said nothing. The photograph is October 1998. Still nothing. By March, Helen Carter was supposedly living at this address. He tapped the lease. But the actual Helen Carter died 7 years earlier. Kramer straightened. You have proof? I do. Wolfe handed him a document. Kramer read it. His face hardened. Death certificate, yes. Same name, yes. Same birth date, yes. Kramer looked at Helen. So you were using a dead woman's identity? Yes. Who arranged it? Helen said nothing. Wolfe answered. Helen turned toward him. What? Helen Carter arranged it. The room seemed to contract. I looked at Helen. She did not deny it. Kramer stood. You expect me to believe she created her own false identity, not merely one. Wolfe's voice was calm. All three. Kramer stared at him. Why? Wolfe sat. Because she had something to protect. Money. No. Property. No. 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 Then what? Wolfe looked at Helen. Her face changed. I had seen that expression before. Not fear, recognition. The kind of recognition a person has when a locked door opens in a room he thought had no doors. Kramer said, Who's Thomas Carter? I answered. Property broker. Connected to the Bell transactions. Disappeared. Kramer looked at Wolfe. Dead? Unknown. Helen spoke quietly. Alive. Kramer turned toward her. You know where he is? No. You saw years ago. When 6 years after Bell disappeared. Kramer frowned. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because Thomas was in danger. From whom? She looked at Wolfe. He answered. From the people who believed Thomas possessed the missing ledger. Kramer turned back to Helen. Did he know? You're sure? Yes. Then where was it? Helen closed her eyes. I don't know. Wolfe said. Kramer looked at him. You believe? I know when she is lying, I said. That's encouraging. Wolfe ignored me. The ledger was not with Thomas. Then where? That is the point of this gathering. Wolfe reached for another document. This is the accounting record from Bull Financial. Mason looked at it. I've seen it, not this copy. Mason leaned closer. Wolfe placed his finger beneath 3 entries. Each bore a different name. Helen Carter, Lydia Mercer, Eleanor Vane. Beside each was a property code. 3 names. Mason nodded. 3 transactions. Yeah, 3 properties. Mason looked more carefully. Yes, Wolfe said no. Mason looked up. No? 3. He moved his finger. 1 property. Silence. I bent over the document. The codes were different, but the final digits were identical. I said. The same parcel. Yes. Mason stared. I never noticed. Because the ledger was designed to conceal the connection. Wolfe picked up a pencil. He wrote 3 numbers on a sheet. Then he wrote 1 number beneath them. The first transaction transferred the property. He pointed to Helen Carter. The second transferred the company holding it. He pointed to Lydia Mercer. The third transferred the debt attached to it. He pointed to Eleanor Vane. All three were parts of one transaction, Kramer said. And Bell was hiding that. Yes. Why? Because the property did not belong to Bell. Kramer stared. Then who owned it? Wolfe looked at Helen. She whispered, Thomas. That was the first real shock. Even Wolfe allowed it to remain in the room for a moment. Thomas Carter, the missing man. The man who had been described as an associate. The man who had discovered the fraud. The man who had supposedly disappeared. The man whose connection to Helen had been deliberately obscured. Kramer said, You're telling me Bell's entire operation involved stealing a property from Thomas Carter? Not stealing. Then, what, transferring it without his knowledge? That sounds like stealing. It becomes stealing after the legal language has been removed. Kramer frowned. Wolfe continued. The property was originally held by Thomas Carter's father. Helen looked at him. Yes. Your father knew. Yes. George Mason knew. Mason looked stunned. No. Wolfe said, You were not told because your father was not the owner on paper. Kramer said, Then who was? An intermediary company. Owned by Bell? No. Who? Wolfe looked at Helen. By Helen Carter. Kramer stared. You're saying she owned the company under one of her identities? Helen nodded. Why? Because Thomas' father wanted to protect the property. From whom? His creditors. Wolfe nodded. Exactly, I understood. The property had been transferred into an artificial company. Helen controlled the company under a false identity. Bell discovered it. Then Bell saw an opportunity. He used the property as collateral. The debt grew. The ownership records became tangled, and eventually the property could be transferred without anyone realizing that the original beneficial owner was Thomas Carter, Kramer said. So Bell was not hiding a property purchase. No. He was hiding a property theft. No. Kramer slammed his hand against the armrest. Wolfe remained serene. He was hiding a transaction that could be challenged in court. That sounds like the same thing. Legally, it is not. Morally? Wolfe looked at him. Morality is not my department. I smiled. Kramer glared at me. Don't. I stopped smiling. Wolfe turned to Helen. Tell Inspector Kramer why you created the 3 identities. She hesitated. Then she said, Because Thomas needed protection. From Bell? Yes. Why not? Simply tell the police. Because the records would have been destroyed. Why? Because Martin Bell and Avery controlled them. Then, why did you not preserve them? I did. Where? She looked at Wolfe. Everywhere, he nodded. That is the answer. I frowned. Everywhere? She divided the evidence, Wolfe explained. The property documents existed under Helen Carter. The financial documents under Lydia Mercer. The correspondence under Eleanor Vane. If one identity was exposed, the entire record could not be assembled. Mason said, That was why the ledger was so important. Yes, because it connected them. Yes, Kramer said. Then why create the ledger? Helen answered. I didn't. Everyone looked at her. Who did? Arthur. Wolfe shook his head. No. Helen looked at him. You created the ledger. Her lips parted. I did not. You created the entries, yes. You designed the 3 identities, yes. You separated the documents, yes. You chose the names, yes. And you constructed the ledger that could reconnect them. She looked at him. Why? Because Thomas needed a master record. Exactly, Wolfe nodded. But you did not intend for anyone else to see it. No. Except Thomas. Yes. And Arthur Bell. She looked down. Yes. Then the ledger was not a record of fraud. No, it was insurance, yes. For Thomas, yes. Against Bell. Yes. Wolfe sat back. Now we can remove another mask. Kramer looked irritated. I still don't understand why Bell didn't simply destroy the ledger. He tried. Then why didn't he? Because he did not have the final page. What was on it? Wolfe looked at Mason. Mr. Mason. Mason swallowed. The final page contained the signatures. Whose? Thomas Carter. Who else? Arthur and Helen. Under which name? Mason hesitated. Eleanor Vane. Helen closed her eyes. Wolfe nodded. There it is, I said. The impossible signature. Yes. The one dated before Eleanor Vane legally existed. Yes. Because she signed it. Yes. Under that identity. Yes, Kramer said. Why? Wolfe looked at Helen. Because the transaction required a third party. Helen answered. I was the third party, and Thomas was the owner. Yes. And Bell was the lender. Yes. So the property was transferred from Thomas to your company, financed by Bell, and then protected through the 3 identities. Yes. And the entire thing was legal. Helen hesitated. At first. Wolfe said, until Bell altered the terms. Yes, what did he do? He changed the repayment schedule. Why? To force default. Then he could seize the property. Yes. Which meant the transaction became fraudulent. Yes, Kramer said. And the ledger proved it. Yes. Then Bell needed it. Yes. Who stole it? Wolfe looked at Helen. She said nothing. Wolfe said, she did. Kramer turned. You said she was protecting Thomas. I was, Helen said. Then why steal the ledger? Because Bell was going to use it against him. How? He could show that Thomas had participated in the original transfer, which would make him look guilty. Yes. And you? I would look like the woman who forged the records. Kramer looked at Wolfe. So she stole the ledger to protect Thomas? Yes. Wolfe looked at Helen. She stared at him. I don't have it. I know. Then who does? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That is what you have been protecting. Helen looked toward the window. I thought the ledger was destroyed. By whom, Arthur? Wrong. Then Thomas. Wrong. Then who? Wolfe leaned forward. You. She stared at him. I told you I didn't have it. You don't. Then how could I have it? You hid it. Where? Somewhere no one would search. Where? You hid it in plain sight. She shook her head. No, yes. Kramer looked between them. Can we stop speaking in riddles? Wolfe ignored him. The ledger was not in the Bell office. No, not in the company records. No, not with Thomas. No, not with you. No. Where was the safest place? Helen looked confused. Wolfe said, inside another identity. Her face changed. I understood. The notebook. Wolfe nodded. The notebook? The leather notebook Helen brought here. I stared. The one she left behind. But it contains only names, dates, and clippings. Exactly. Those aren't clues to the ledger. They are the ledger. I looked at the notebook. Wolfe opened it. The pages were covered with apparently meaningless dates. Names, newspaper clippings, addresses. But now he turned the pages differently. He placed 3 names side by side. Helen Carter, Lydia Mercer, Eleanor Vane. Then he arranged the dates. The dates matched 3 transactions. He turned another page. The newspaper clippings corresponded to property transfers. Another page contained initials. Another contained numbers. She divided the ledger, I said. Across the notebook. Yes. Mason leaned forward. I knew those numbers looked familiar. They're count references. Yes. Not account numbers. Mason frowned. Property codes. Exactly. Kramer said. So the notebook is the ledger. Part of it. What is the rest? Wolfe looked at Helen. She whispered. The signatures. Where? Helen closed her eyes. With Thomas. Kramer said. Where is Thomas? I don't know. Wolfe said. Yes, you do. Helen shook her head. No. 6 years ago. She looked at him. Yes, where? In London. Where? She hesitated. At a hotel. Which hotel? The Belgrave. I looked at Wolfe. He was already reaching for the telephone. That hotel has been searched. Not for Thomas? Why? Because the name he used was not Thomas Carter, I said. Another identity? Yes, which one? Helen looked at me. Edward Bell. Edward Bell, Arthur's father. Dead. Yes. Then Thomas used the name of a dead man. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. Why? Because Helen taught him. Kramer stared at her. You created identities for him too? Helen nodded. Yes. How many? 3. So the masks weren't only hers. No, Thomas had them too. Wolfe sat back. And that is why the ledger could not be destroyed, Kramer said. Why? Because the identities existed in different jurisdictions. Meaning, Thomas could disappear forever until the records were connected by the ledger. Yes. Kramer looked at Helen. You built an entire system of false identities. Helen's voice was quiet. To save a man's life. Wolfe corrected her. No, she looked at him. You built it to save the evidence. Helen said nothing. Wolfe continued. Thomas Carter could have disappeared without it, but the property would have been lost. Yes. The records would have been destroyed. Yes. Then, what else could I do? Wolfe's expression softened slightly. Nothing. It was the closest thing to sympathy I had ever heard from him. The telephone rang. Wolfe answered. Yes. He listened. Who? Another pause. How long? He listened again. Then he said, send it. He replaced the receiver. Kramer asked. What? Wolfe looked at him. The London investigator has found the hotel registration. Thomas? No. Arthur? Yes. Who was with him? Wolfe glanced at Helen. Charles Avery. Kramer swore. Where? Registered under Arthur Bennett. And Avery? Charles Avery. Real name? Yes. When? 6 years ago. Then Avery knew Bell was alive. Yes. Did Helen know? Wolfe looked at her. She saw them, Kramer said, and she didn't tell us. Helen lowered her head. I was afraid. Of Avery? No. Then who? She looked at Wolfe. Martin Bell. Kramer froze. Arthur's brother? Yes, he's dead. Helen shook her head. No. The room fell silent. Wolfe looked at me, then at Kramer, then at Helen. Now, he said, we are ready. Kramer stared. Ready for what? Wolfe gathered the documents, the final explanation. I followed him into the hall. Kramer is going to arrest somebody. Eventually. Who? That depends. On what? Who comes through the door? I looked toward the entrance. Someone is coming here? Yes. Who? Wolfe continued toward the dining room. George Mason? No. Helen. She is already here. Kramer? No. Then who? Wolfe sat down at the table. Martin Bell. I stopped. You know where he is? I know where he has been. Where? New York. All this time? Yes. Wolfe picked up his fork. The altered photograph. I frowned. What about it? The photograph was not altered by an editor. Charles Avery? No. Helen? Martin? Wolfe nodded. Martin removed the face. Why? Because he knew Helen's identity. Then why did he leave it? He didn't. I stared. But we found it. Someone replaced it. Who? I understood. She secretly returned the negative. Yes. Why? Because she wanted proof. Against Martin? Yes. Then why did she give it to Wolfe? She didn't. Someone else did. Yes. Who? Wolfe smiled. That is the final mask. The bell downstairs rang once. Kramer reached for his coat. Mason stood. Helen looked terrified. I moved toward the hall. Wolfe remained seated. The door opened. A man entered. He was tall, thin, grey-haired, and carrying a black walking stick. He looked older than the photograph. But I recognized him. Arthur Bell. He looked at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at him. Neither spoke. Then Bell said, I suppose the game is over. Wolfe lifted his eyes. No, Mr. Bell. He glanced toward Kramer. It has finally begun. And that was when I understood that all our masks had been removed except one. The mask worn by the man who had spent 28 years pretending to be dead. Chapter 8. The name that mattered, Arthur Bell, stood in Nero Wolfe's office, as though he had merely stepped out for a newspaper and returned to find that someone had rearranged the furniture. He was older than the man in the photograph. Naturally. 28 years will make an honest man look guilty, and a guilty man look respectable. And Bell had acquired something more useful than either appearance. He had acquired patience. His grey hair was combed neatly back. His suit was dark and expensive without being conspicuous. His walking stick was polished. His eyes were alert. Inspector Kramer stared at him. George Mason looked as if someone had struck him. Helen Carter did not move. I closed the door. Bell glanced around the room. Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe did not rise. Mr. Bell, I believe you have been looking for me. No. Bell smiled faintly. You have been looking for Arthur Bell. That is different. How? I was looking for the man who caused the trouble. Bell looked at Helen. And did you find him? Wolfe nodded. Yes. Bell's eyes rested on her. I thought so. Kramer stepped forward. Arthur Bell, you're under arrest. Bell turned. On what charge? Kramer hesitated. Wolfe said. Not yet, Inspector. Kramer looked at him. Not yet. If you arrest him now, you will learn only what he chooses to tell you. I can question him, of course. I can hold him, possibly. Then why not? Because the evidence is not complete. Kramer looked at me. I shrugged. That was Wolfe. He could have the criminal sitting 6 feet away and still insist that the furniture be properly arranged before the confession. Bell smiled. Mr. Wolfe is correct. Kramer grunted. Bell ignored him. He looked at Wolfe. You have the ledger? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. No. Bell smiled. Then you have not solved the case. In fact, you haven't found it. I have. Bell stopped smiling. Wolfe reached toward the table. He picked up the leather notebook Eleanor Vane had left behind. This is part of it. Bell stared at the notebook. For the first time his composure weakened, only slightly. But I saw it, so did Wolfe. Mr. Bell, Wolfe said, you made one serious mistake. I made several. You underestimated the importance of a woman's memory. Bell looked at Helen. I underestimated nothing. You did. No. You believed changing a name changed a fact. Bell said nothing. Wolfe opened the notebook. That is impossible. He placed the first page on the desk. Helen Carter. The second, Lydia Mercer. The third, Eleanor Vane. 3 names, 3 sets of records, 3 addresses, 3 signatures. But beneath them were the same dates, the same property codes, the same transfers, the same account references. Wolfe said, you believed the identities were separate. Bell answered quietly. They were. No, they were legally separate. That is not the same thing. Bell looked at the notebook. Who gave you that? Helen. Belle turned toward her. She lowered her eyes. You gave him the notebook? Yes. Why? Because I wanted the truth known. Belle laughed softly. After all these years? Yes, you destroyed everything. No, Helen looked up. You did. Wolfe raised one hand. Let us proceed in order. That was Wolfe's way. He never chased the truth. He made it sit down and wait its turn. Arthur Bell established a network of companies through which property was transferred. Bell said nothing. Some transactions were legitimate. Yes. Some were not. Bell remained silent. Mr. Mason looked at Wolfe. Did Bell Financial maintain separate records for property transactions? Yes. Did those records include the names Helen Carter, Lydia Mercer, and Eleanor Vane? Yes. Did they refer to the same assets? Yes. Did you know those names belonged to one woman? Eventually. When? After the October transaction. Wolfe nodded. Good. He turned to Kramer. The significance is not that Helen used several names. Kramer said. Then what is it? The significance is that Bell used those names to make one transaction appear to be three unrelated transactions. Kramer frowned. Explain. Wolfe pointed to the documents. The property was first transferred through an account associated with Helen Carter. He moved to the second document. The debt was then assigned through an account associated with Lydia Mercer. He touched the third. The final interest was transferred through Eleanor Vane. Kramer looked at Mason. All the same property? Yes. All the same money? Ultimately. Then Bell was moving the same asset through three identities. Yes, Wolfe said. Exactly. Bell smiled. You have misunderstood. Have I? The identities belong to different legal persons. No. Bell's smile disappeared. They were designed to appear that way. Designed by whom? Bell looked toward Helen. She answered, me. Kramer stared at her. You admit it? Helen nodded. Yes, Bell said. She is lying. Wolfe turned to him. She is. Bell looked surprised. Wolfe continued. But not about what you think. Helen looked at him. You created the identity, yes. You maintained them. Yes, you used them to separate the records. Yes, you signed documents under all three. Yes, you did this because you believed Thomas Carter would lose everything if the property records were exposed. Helen nodded. Yes, Kramer said. Who was Thomas Carter? Helen looked at him, the rightful owner. Bell said nothing. Wolfe continued. Thomas Carter's father placed the property in a holding company to protect it from creditors. Yes. Helen controlled that company. Yes. Bell discovered the arrangement. Yes. And saw an opportunity. Helen's voice was quiet. He wanted the property. Bell interrupted. I wanted to protect the property. Wolfe looked at him. You wanted to control it. That is not the same thing. It became the same thing when you altered the debt. Bell's face hardened. You cannot prove that. Wolfe reached for another document. We can. It was the final page of the ledger. I had not seen it before. Neither had Kramer. Wolfe placed it beside the notebook. There were 4 signatures. Arthur Bell, Thomas Carter, Helen Carter, and Eleanor Vane. Beneath them was a property description. Beneath that was an amount. Beneath that was a clause in Bell's handwriting. The repayment terms. The original agreement required payment over 5 years. Bell's later version required payment in 6 months. The alteration had been made after the original signatures. Kramer picked it up. Hoss. Wolfe nodded. That proves nothing. Yes. It proves the terms were altered. By whom? Wolfe pointed to the handwriting. By you. Bell laughed. You have no handwriting expert. We don't need one. Why? Because you signed the amendment. Bell looked at the page. His expression changed. The signature was his. But beside it was a date. And beneath that date was the name of the witness. Charles Avery. Kramer looked at Wolfe. Where is Avery? Dead? No. Missing, for the moment? Bell said. Avery has nothing to do with this. Wolfe smiled. Then you will be pleased to know he has already made a statement. Bell went still. Kramer stared at Wolfe. When, this morning, you spoke to him? No. Then who did? The London investigator. Wolfe opened another folder. Avery's confirmed that Bell ordered the terms changed. Bell said nothing. That is the first part of the truth, I said. And the ledger? Wolfe looked at me. The ledger was never destroyed. Where was it? Pieces of it were separated. The notebook. One part the final page, another. Where? Wolfe looked at Helen. She said quietly. With Thomas, Kramer asked. Where is Thomas now? Helen shook her head. I don't know. Wolfe said he is alive. She looked at him. How do you know? The signature. He tapped the final page. That signature was made 6 years ago. Helen stared. 6 years? Yes, impossible. No. Wolfe pointed to the ink. Modern ink. Not 28 years old. Kramer leaned closer. You're saying Thomas signed this recently? Yes. Where? In London. Helen's face changed. He gave it to Bell. No. Then who? Wolfe looked at Arthur Bell. Bell obtained it. Bell said nothing. Wolfe continued. Thomas gave a copy to Helen. Helen shook her head. I never received this. No. How? She received the original page. Helen looked confused. You have the original? No. Then where? Wolfe smiled. That is the final trick. He reached into the leather notebook. The back cover had always seemed thicker than necessary. I had noticed it. Wolfe had noticed it first. He took a small knife and carefully opened the inner seam. A folded sheet slid out. Helen gasped. Mason stood. Kramer reached for it. Wolfe handed the paper to him. Kramer unfolded it. The room was silent. The final page of the ledger. Not a copy. The original. Kramer looked at Helen. You hid this. She shook her head. I didn't know it was there. Wolfe said. You did. No, you put it there. I don't remember. You were using the notebook when you were Eleanor Vane? Yes. You carried it for years. Yes. You never opened the back cover. No. Because you had forgotten. She stared at him. I forgot. Yes. Wolfe's voice softened. That was your greatest protection. Helen looked at the page. Then at him. You hid it from yourself. Tears appeared in her eyes. I must have. You did. Why? Because you knew that if you remembered, someone else could force the location from you. She covered her mouth. Wolfe continued. Your identities were not merely disguises. No, they were compartments in your memory. Helen nodded slowly. Yes. Each name carried part of the story. Yes, that is why your memories seemed contradictory. Yes, one woman remembered the property. Yes, yes, another remembered the money. Yes, third remembered the danger. Helen whispered. Yes. Wolfe looked at Kramer. That is why the witnesses disagreed. Kramer lowered the document. So the contradictions were deliberate. Yes. The neighbors remembered different versions of Helen, because different records supported different versions. The altered a manufactured address, the newspaper photograph, a manufactured absence, the 3 signatures under manufactured identities, the missing ledger, not missing, the footprints. Kramer looked at me. I said, part of the stage performance. Wolfe nodded. The theater case was not relevant. I looked at him. Story. Wolfe blinked once. Then he looked at me. Yes, I cleared my throat. Ignore that, Kramer grunted. Wolfe continued. The important point is that every contradiction served the same purpose. He looked at Helen. To make one woman appear to be several. Bell said, You have not proved that Helen was innocent. No. Wolfe turned toward him. I have not. Bell smiled. Then you have nothing. Wolfe's eyes hardened. We have the ledger. Bell looked at the document. It proves she participated. Yes. It proves she signed. Yes. It proves she controlled the accounts. Yes. It proves she transferred the property. Yes. So she is guilty. Wolfe nodded. Participation. Helen lowered her head. But not of the fraud. Bell stared at him. Explain. She believed the transactions protected Thomas Carter. She knew what she was doing. Yes. Then she is guilty. Perhaps. Wolfe paused. But you are forgetting the altered agreement. Bell said nothing. And the fraudulent transfer. Still nothing. And the fact that she attempted to preserve the evidence. Bell's expression hardened. That does not make her innocent. No. Wolfe looked at Helen. It makes her motive understandable. Helen's. I did it. Kramer looked at her. Do not. She shook her head. No. I did. She looked at Wolfe. I created the identities. Yes. I moved the records. Yes. I helped Bell. Yes, and I hid the ledger. Yes. Thought I was protecting Thomas. You were. But I also protected myself. Wolfe nodded. Yes, I was afraid. Yes. I wanted the whole thing erased. Yes, I wanted the names to disappear. Yes, but the facts remained. Wolfe looked at her. That is the difficulty with facts. She smiled sadly. I spent 28 years changing names. Yes. And none of them changed what happened. No. Kramer walked to the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he turned Bell. Arthur Bell looked at him. You're coming with me. Bell did not resist. As Kramer reached for his arm, Bell said, "Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe looked at him. "You think you've solved everything?" "I have. You haven't found Thomas?" "No." "You haven't found Avery?" "No." "You haven't recovered every document?" "No." Bell smiled. "Then you haven't finished." Wolfe's expression did not change. "Mr. Bell." "Yes? I do not need every document." "Why?" "Because the documents I have are sufficient." Bell's smile disappeared. "The law may disagree. The law can decide that." Kramer tightened his grip. Bell looked at Helen. "You should have left it alone," she answered quietly. "I did. For 28 years. "Yes. And now?" She looked at him. "Now I remembered." Kramer led Bell toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped. "One question," Wolfe said. "Yes? How did you know Bell was coming here?" Wolfe looked at me. "Archie," I said. "Don't look at me." Wolfe turned back to Kramer. "The photograph. The altered one. I don't see it." Bell knew we had found the original. "Yes. He came here because he wanted the negative." Kramer frowned. "And you knew he would?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because the negative was the only evidence that connected Helen to him before the transaction." Kramer nodded slowly. "So you used it as bait?" "No." Wolfe looked offended. "I placed it where he would believe it was available," I said. "That's what bait is." Wolfe ignored me. Kramer smiled. For once he seemed almost pleased. "All right?" He took Bell downstairs. The front door closed. George Mason remained seated. He looked at Helen. "After all these years?" She nodded. "I know. You should have told me. I was afraid I could have helped." "I know." Mason looked toward Wolfe. "Did you know from the beginning?" "No." "How much did you know?" "Enough to ask questions." Mason smiled. "That is not the same thing." No. He stood. "I suppose I should go." Wolfe nodded. "Yes." Mason reached the door. Helen looked at him. "Your father would have been proud." She began to cry. Mason left. The room was finally quiet. The brownstone had returned to itself. Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Wolfe?" "Yes?" "Your lunch." Wolfe looked at the clock. It was nearly 3. "Cold?" "Warm." "Excellent." Fritz disappeared. I sat down. Helen remained by the window. "Mr. Wolfe, what happens to me?" "That depends on Inspector Kramer." "I know. You will have to answer for what you did." She nodded. "Will Thomas? If he is found, he will be." Wolfe looked at her. "You know where he is?" She hesitated. "Perhaps." "Why didn't you tell us?" "'Cause I wanted to be certain." "Of what?" "That he was safe." Wolfe nodded. "That is acceptable." She looked surprised. "You believe me?" "I believe you now." She smiled. Then she picked up her coat. At the door she stopped. "What was my real name?" I looked at her. She smiled faintly. "I mean, which one mattered?" "None of them." She waited. The facts mattered. She nodded. Then she left. I went into the dining room with Wolfe. Fritz had kept the roast warm. Wolfe sat. I took the chair opposite him. For a while he ate in silence. Then I said, "So that is it?" "Yes." "Helen created 3 identities." "Yes." "To protect Thomas." "Yes." "She helped create the transaction." "Yes." "Bell corrupted it." "Yes." "She hid the evidence." "Yes." "Then spent 28 years trying to erase the trail." "Yes." "And the trail exposed her." "Yes." I shook my head. "That is the part I like." "What part?" "She changed everything except the facts." Wolfe cut another piece of beef. "Names are useful." "For what?" "Identifying people." "And otherwise useless." "That's harsh." "It is accurate." He ate. I waited. Then he said, "Change a name, Archie, and you may change the record." He put down his knife. "But if the facts beneath the name remain unchanged, the truth has not moved an inch." I looked toward the office. The leather notebook was still on Wolfe's desk. 3 names, 1 woman, 1 transaction, 1 hidden ledger, and nearly 3 decades of deception that had finally collapsed because no collection of names could make 1 set of facts become 3. I said, "So Eleanor Vane was never the important name?" "No." "Helen Carter?" "No." "Then which name mattered?" Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. The name that mattered was Thomas Carter. I looked at him, because he was the person everything was built to protect. "Yes." "And the person everything nearly destroyed." I smiled. "Good ending." Wolfe opened his eyes. "It is not an ending." "What is it?" "An accounting." "Of what?" "Human stupidity." I laughed. Wolfe reached for his coffee. "Archie." "Yes?" "For Fritz, the pears were excellent." "You're admitting it?" "I am." "Then this case really is over." Wolfe looked toward the orchids. No, he took a sip of coffee. The orchids are never over. And that was as close to sentiment as Nero Wolfe was likely to come. As for the woman with 2 names, 3 identities, and 1 secret, she had finally learned what Wolfe had known from the beginning. A name could be changed, a record could be altered, a photograph could be cut, a ledger could be hidden. But the truth had an inconvenient habit of remaining exactly where it had always been. Underneath the name,